City Council Budget Work Session will come to order. Mr. Trivett, call the roll.
Mr. Zhang?
Here.
Mr. Pons?
Here.
Mayor Friley?
Here.
Vice Mayor Foster?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Paul's on mute today, so we ought to be able to get through this in about 30 minutes. We're going to start off with background presentations and discussion. Introduction to the Tourism Fund by Barbara Dameron.
Good morning, Mayor Freiling and members of council. As we give an overview of the Tourism Fund this morning, I want to note that with the approval of Senate Bill 942, it certainly gives us options that will provide enhanced funding opportunities to fund the tourism in Greater Williamsburg area. I want to note that this should be more of a conversation, so I want to encourage you to interject with your questions, comments, or discussion items as we move forward, even though there's time allotted toward the end of this presentation to have additional discussion. The proposed budget for 2019 includes the Tourism Fund based on the ordinances that are set to take effect July 1st. And that includes the increase in meals tax and rooms tax and the addition of an admissions tax. Regardless of whether council elects to move forward under the proposed option or under the options that are provided under Senate Bill 942, either way, the creation of a tourism fund provides for more transparency in how we account for tourism dollars. You can clearly see where the funding comes from and how that funding is expended. I want to start first with a recap of the tourism fund is proposed in the budget. And of course, we see that we have 1.5% meals tax, 3% rooms tax, and 3.5% admission tax. That's going to generate $4.6 million. In addition to that, we have the transfer from the general fund, and that transfer is for the maintenance of effort and is level funding with what we currently have in this year's budget. And then we have total expenditures of $3.9 million. Those are broken down into three components. The first component is administrative costs. That includes staff, so in this case that would be the economic development specialist, and the operating expenses. That $105,000 for administrative expense represents 3.2% of the revenues, well under the 10% that the policy allows. The Tourism Maintenance Fund is, again, the level funding that we have currently in this budget to fund the Hotel and Motel Association, the Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance, the Colonial Williamsburg, as well as the Kings Mills Championship and the Virginia Arts Festival. Then we have the Tourism Development Fund expenditures and the funding for the WADMAC, the $1.3 million, represents 2% of the rooms tax. And then we have a marketing contingency of $150,000. That contingency is there to allow for funding of additional agencies, and anything that's not funded through that budget process, any residual value, will be available for future applications. And then we have $150,000 in the Tourism Development Fund expenditures. So we have a total expenditures of $3.9 million. We have total revenues, including the transfer from the general fund, of $6.8 million, and that's allowing $2.9 million to be set aside in reserves and available for future tourism infrastructure. Any questions at this point on what we currently have proposed in the budget?
Ramsey?
Just to be sure that I've got it all straight. So if we add up the revenues and then we add up the expenditures, what's left over is that $2.9 million.
Correct.
So what you've done is, for those of us who don't think
Sure.
number-wise too much, so you've taken the expenditures and sort of pre-deducted to come up with the TDF reserve number on the left-hand
Correct.
side.
And I guess for us accountants,
Right.
we like balance, so I like for my number on the right to equal my number on the left. But in essence, we have revenues over and above the expenditures of $2.9 million. So that will be set aside and reserved for future tourism initiatives.
So that could be through the grant fund or things like that. And when we say the Tourism Marketing Contingency Fund, that is something that we have had in the past, and it is completely gone right now, so this is to reestablish
This
it.
is to reestablish it, and in just a few minutes, we have a couple of agencies that have requested funding, and we'll give them, if they've not presented yet, so we'll give them a chance to present. Council had requested an opportunity to be involved in those requests, and so that those funds are available for that type of funding. And again, anything that is not established during the budget process will be available for future applications.
So anything not used this year could roll over into other years.
Certainly.
And then the TDF expenditure, we're also going to hear what that $150,000
You are gonna hear,
is
yes.
allocated for. And when we talk about the Virginia Arts, that's the Virginia Arts Festival and Fun Fest.
That's correct.
Okay. And I think I had a couple of other questions. So basically, we're creating a tourism fund sort of alongside the general fund, and in that tourism fund are these three components.
That's correct.
And when you say tourism maintenance, that's the things that we have historically funded on an annual basis.
Correct. That's our maintenance effort. And in the case of the proposed budget, that $2.2 million is level funding with what we have in fiscal 2018.
And this is just to capture all of sort of tourism expenditures in one pot.
In one
basically.
pot. And again, that's what I think provides the transparency, is you have one fund that's tracking both the revenues and the expenditures. It adds for a little more clarity.
Okay, thank you.
Follow-up question. What we have here in the maintenance of efforts is staff's recommendation, is not what council has ultimately agreed on.
Correct.
Just
This is an
proposed.
opportunity for council to discuss the proposed. That's the amount that was funded for those in FY18.
Thank you.
If council would like to amend or adjust, we're open for your discussion.
And we still have the opportunity to make that decision
Yes.
with this, but if we accept 942, the maintenance of effort is mandated by state code, is that correct?
That is correct, but
As
it
to one and two.
specifically states to and for the use of the Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance.
I had a quick question. Ms. Ramsey touched on this before, but the administrative expenditure and the TDF expenditure, is that for the administrative position, or are we talking about two different things?
We're talking two different things. The administrative is going to handle the economic development specialist staff, the benefits associated with that, as well as other operating costs.
So we currently have an economic specialist staff member.
No, we do not. That position is proposed in the upcoming budget.
There's a position, but it's not for the tourism. This is the position that we've talked about through the Tourism Development Fund process to administer the new program.
That's the 10% from the TDF policy.
But it's not 10%, it's
3.2.
3.2.
as reported.
Sure, okay,
The policy limit is 10%.
sure.
We have no intention of spending that.
So then that TDF expenditure will be something else in terms of,
Yes, and I'll speak to that just shortly.
okay.
Okay.
I'll withhold my excitement.
Okay.
So just to clarify for anybody who might be watching, this scenario only takes place if council does not repeal these additional taxes that were approved last fall.
Correct. This is
Some
what,
version of this scenario.
yes, this is based on what was approved last fall, set to be effective July 1st.
So it does,
But there is an opportunity to repeal some of this, which we will discuss in just a few slides.
Just trying to clarify for anybody
Sure.
watching that Senate Bill 942 is a totally different makeup, and we'll get to that in a minute. The one thing I would like to point out that might be a little confusing for people is that on the left-hand side, as I'm looking at the screen, the revenues, we're really talking about $6.8 million.
Correct.
And it's because that 2.9 is pulled out on the revenue side, it makes it look like there's only a wash between 3.93 collected and then 3.93 still going to marketing. But it's 3.93 going to marketing and an additional 2.9 going to potentially to product development and/or marketing. And that's what the TDF reserves. And I think the part that makes it a little confusing is when we have total TDF listed there at a 1.62, and that doesn't take into account the TDF reserves that are on the other side of the slide.
That's correct. What that really shows is that right now in this proposed budget, we have $1.6 million proposed for expenditures right now going into the budget. However, there are revenue support $2.9 million additional expenditures, and the plan would be to set that in reserves for future use.
So really, it's an expenditure, just has parentheses on the revenue side.
It is available revenue to be expended.
The other thing I think important about this is that total revenues from the taxes that the TDF, the legislation that we put in place is 4.6 million, a little bit more than that.
Right.
And it also it's room and meals and admission. So these are generally revenues that are derived from visitors, not so much on the meal side, but on admissions and lodging.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. At this point, before I continue, we do have a couple of agencies that have requested funding and have not had the opportunity to present before council. We'd like to give them that opportunity at this point in time. And the first presenter is Stuart Honenberger with An Occasion for the Arts.
Morning, Stuart.
Morning, friends. Thank you all very much for having me. I'd like to say a special thank you to Marvin and the city staff. They continue to be great partners to work with for An Occasion for the Arts, who I'm here to speak about with you all this morning. So thank you. As hopefully it is beginning to leak out into the media, 2018 will be An Occasion for the Arts' 50th year. And we are extremely excited about that milestone. Represents a tremendous achievement of our community to create, foster, and grow an event of this magnitude. So I'd especially like to thank council for their leadership gift 2 years ago, their contribution to really push us to expand, to move to 3 days after I had moved to 2 days 7 years ago, to help us engage consultants in the areas of sponsorship and fundraising, as well as artistic direction and improving and increasing the quality of the show. We feel those have been extremely successful and have been a worthwhile investment. The board, which has expanded significantly, and I think we have a slide here that sort of represents it, has expanded in the last year. We now have 20 community members serving 3-year terms. We've engaged with members of the college and the city and Merchant Square, Kiwanis, Chamber of Commerce, as well as both visual and performing artists. And that board has undertaken quite a bit of discussion in the last 3 or 4 months around our 50th, not just what we want to do this year to celebrate that milestone, but also what we want the future of the organization to look like. And the funding request that we put forward for this year's budget is really meant to help us celebrate this year, both promote that celebration as well as carry it out, but also to continue to build into the future that we believe is possible. And I want to take just a minute to outline, in our view, sort of 3 potential options of where An Occasion for the Arts can land. Obviously, we started as a community show, put on by volunteers and put on annually as a one-day event, and there's a lot of proud heritage there. We have undertaken the last 7 years to expand to be a regional, and with the hope of being a top 100 art show in the country, one that would draw people, both artists and patrons from around the country. We think we've accomplished that with quite a bit of effort, but we think we're there, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then finally, I think to become truly a national show, one that would be considered, one of the top 25 or 30 shows that we sort of set our sights on internally as an organization, but we are finding the level of staff and promotion to accomplish that, given our demographics, a smaller community relative to some of the larger cities, creates a challenge for us to do on our own. So we just want to present that as something to consider, not for this year's funding request, but to keep in mind that to take an occasion for the arts beyond the regional show that we've built it to, really we need a partner, someone that's going to take it and want it to be something bigger than maybe it is today. I'll go back and just hit this real quick. We set out a couple years ago to make our show a top 100 show in the country. There's a couple different metrics that you would use to evaluate that, but the Art Fair source book is the, I would say, leading source for artists to choose where to participate. And I won't read this quote, but it's in your presentation. Hopefully y'all can take some time, but I think it's an encouraging sign, and actually in this ranking for 2018, we are now the 95th ranked art show in the country. So we've accomplished that goal, and we're excited about that. Two direct benefits of this effort that we've undertaken have been our artistic revenue has increased from around $53,000 to $60,000. We're continuing to grow that, but that's been a major increase through the hiring of our executive director and his work with us. And the second is individual and corporate sponsors. Just 3 years ago, we had less than $10,000 in total individual and corporate sponsorships, and we've been able to grow that to over $25,000. So we're doing our part, we believe, to create the funding that is needed to sustain the organization. Looking forward for the future, we'll talk a little bit about our current impact. We did have extrapolated from our artist surveys last year close to $500,000 of art sales over the 2.5 days. We had over 160 artists stay in hotel rooms while they were here. Police estimates of 25 to 35,000 visitors. Obviously, the impact of hotels, meals, parking, attractions are difficult for an organization of our size to track, but we believe they're there. Hiring of the city staff for additional services and promotion of local businesses. I want to make room for questions, so I'll leave our challenges up here, which are the things we're asking you to partner with us on. But I would say that I believe we have a tremendous resource and asset in an occasion for the arts, one that is producing good fruit now, but that has the potential to do much more. And we hope that we can kick that off in this year with our 50th celebration and continue that momentum together. So, yield my time to questions.
Thank you, Stuart, for the presentation. It's always a fun event, and I hate to say how many years I remember it attending, but it's been for a majority of them from when I was in college. So a couple things. You said that this year you want to take advantage of the 50th, and the additional funding request would be to help promote that. So I assume that the majority of it would be in marketing that you're asking for the funds in. And what do you foresee as the best marketing means that you can afford and reach potential visitors?
Absolutely. So we've engaged a marketing consultant going back 2 years, again, through the contributions of the council, and they've really steered us towards social media, towards web and internet marketing. We have done some print and radio as well. We've focused in Richmond and Virginia Beach, and that's been effective. We'd like to sort of double down on those efforts as well as expand beyond the area. We've given her a pretty tight budget for 2018, kind of consistent with what we did last year, about $16,000, $17,000 to promote it. If we were to receive these funds, we would look to increase that by $10,000 to $12,000, and then obviously receive back from her proposal of what those dollars would go towards. We've also collaborated with the Chamber on marketing strategy. 2 years ago when we received the funds from the Council, we also received funds from the Chamber. That wasn't the case in 2017, and it's not budgeted to be the case in 2018, but we would look to lean on their expertise as well in how best to spend that money.
And to increase overnight visitation from guests, what do you foresee as the sort of the market to do that? Because I would guess that most people coming from Richmond and Virginia Beach would come in for the day, do the art show, and then go home.
Yes, I think it's a great question. We have endeavored to create sort of a menu of offerings. Last year, for example, we partnered with the Williamsburg Symphony to put on a series of concerts similar to what they do at Holiday Pops on Saturday and Sunday. Having the 144 visual artists, it's more than you can do in a day, and so we try and market it as a weekend. We've also partnered with Culture Fix to put on a Friday night event so that people can come down and be a part of that. This year, being our 50th, we'd like on Saturday night to have more of a headliner concert style evening. Again, as a small organization, it's tough to overcome that. I've looked at the Funhouse Fest as a successful example of how you can build something. When I look at our event, 50 years that already has a large population, I think, gosh, if we had some more infrastructure, some more resources, couldn't we launch something on a Saturday night or a capper on Sunday night that would cause people to stay? The 50th, the way the weekends fall, it does happen to be a Columbus Day weekend, so I think the chance to draw people to stay till Monday morning is an option, but we need to partner with Colonial Williamsburg for their programming, with other folks.
Yeah, it sounds like if you could partner and create packages for people to come in for hotels and restaurants and the art show, then that would be a little better draw for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Stuart, thanks for coming in. The Occasion Free Art is a wonderful little, not little anymore, but thing that we have here in the community. And like Miss Ramsey, I can remember going back many years to them and serving hot dogs when parents were involved. Mm-hmm. Talk about the programming that you see that you could expand. What kind of ideas do you have?
Absolutely. I think I really feel that over the last 2 years with our executive director who's here today, and thank Leo for his time, we have made the artistic quality on a visual side really second to none. We have over 300 applicants for 140 spots, and I think promoting the quality of those artists remains our strongest draw. However, we can also improve our performing artists. So we've increased that budget to about $11,000. With last year's symphony, that was actually quite a bit more. But we would think that a Saturday night headliner concert, Culture Fix did a great job bringing in an out-of-state act on Friday night last year, but continue to improve that quality. And then culinary arts, I think, is another part that naturally fits alongside of this, whether they're dine outs at our local restaurants, whether they're tent or street food, anything that we can do to say we've got something high quality, something unique that's part of that weekend. 2 years ago, we partnered with the Blue Talon and did the Art of Taste, and it was a craft beverage festival, and it was really, really neat, but it just put a lot of strain and effort on them and us, and we just it's very difficult to maintain the momentum of those things without consistent funding.
In here, you have some information about sales that you've gotten from surveys talking to the artists. Have you seen an uptick in that since you went to 2 days to 3 days and included some of the other programming that you discussed?
We absolutely have, and I can follow up with you with exact numbers because Leo knows them really, really well. But essentially, we've seen that increase, I would think, by 40% over the last 2 years. So it was like 2,200 to almost 4,000. So it's more than 40%. So yeah, significant increase. Obviously the economy we think has something to do with that, but the quality of the artists as well, and then our promotion. We are promoting at twice the promotion dollars are going into this than were 3 years ago.
Sure. And so stand to reason that as you get additional funding for additional programming, additional communications, better artists, that those sales may go up.
Absolutely.
So long as it doesn't rain.
Yes.
Right.
Right. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Stuart, for your presentation and for coming in today. I think it's sufficient to say that Vacation for the Arts has been inspirational towards this council's further discussion on how to find ways to cultivate the special events destination here, adding to the vibrancy in our area. So it's cool to see that it's coming. Vacation for the Arts is approaching its 50th year, and this all seems very, very great. I have no further questions for you because my colleagues have already asked all the questions I've had. But I have one for Ms. Dameron. Sorry to put you on the spot, but real quickly, the Arts Commission already recommended that the Vacation for the Arts receive $13,000, right? So this $25,000, is it on top of that $13,000, or is it increasing that $13,000 to $25,000?
This would be the 25, I believe, would be the total funding request, no? On top?
It'd be in addition. The Arts Commission provides arts programming funds, and this is for tourism marketing. So it's two different uses of funds. If you can think two different program purposes. The Arts Commission is also shared funding with James City County in a joint collaborative effort. So they have a different mission and focus than the tourism marketing funds that we're discussing here. That they wouldn't be able to use the Arts Commission funding in the same manner as this, just like this wouldn't be used for the other.
Understood. Just wanted to make sure that was clarified.
Yes.
And that there were two different purposes.
Yes.
But thank you for your presentation. Appreciate your being here today.
Mr. Honenberger, can you talk just a little bit about what is the threshold at which, or beyond which, you don't think it makes sense for an occasion for the arts to grow? I mean, there is a point of diminishing return on investment, and it's a very nice weekend now. Do you see that as kind of being the end game there, or what do you see really longer term?
Sure. I think with partnership, and when I think of partnership, I don't just think of dollars. I think probably partnering with Colonial Williamsburg would be the ideal fit. This has the potential to be a national festival that people put on their calendars around the country and say, we're going to go, and I think that could be a 7 to 10 day arts festival. It wouldn't be a 7 to 10 day visual arts festival necessarily, but highlighting our museums, highlighting performances, highlighting the college's art, highlighting culinary arts, highlighting youth art, highlighting literary art. I think it has that sort of potential. What I can say after 6 or 7 years at the helm is that we as an organization don't have the financial resources nor the time resources to do that. We've brought on an executive director on a part-time basis. That's been effective at raising the artistic quality and increasing sponsorships, but we can't execute a promotion and marketing plan. We can't line up large events and acts and add those ancillary events that drive it without that. So I think that is there, and I'd almost sort of leave it to council or to another to work with us on, is that worth it? Is that part of the vision that the city has for what an occasion can be in the fall? I think we've sort of undertaken it with Williamsburg Fall Arts, and I think this could be either enhancement or another direction to take that. Absent that sort of partnership, I'm with you. I think probably $100,000 to $115,000 a year budget can put on a really good 2.5 day art show with some minimal staffing and some minimal marketing, and I think we're going to draw people. I don't think it'll grow from there, but I think it'll be a nice quality of life and regional tourism event.
So would you see this additional support, if it's approved, going as a one-time bump to celebrate, help recognize the 50th anniversary of an occasion for the arts, as opposed to a launching pad or launching point for future growth that gets leveraged in later years?
It's a great question. I think that, as I've broken it down, $12,000 to $15,000 of this is going to be used in 2018 very directly to promote the 50th and to put on ancillary events attached to the 50th. The other 10 is really viewed as to bolster our friend-raising campaign, our corporate sponsorship campaign, bolster our staff structure through marketing in an effort that we could do that more sustainably in the future. To continue that, I would think that 10 or so, if not more, would be needed on an ongoing basis.
Thank you.
So based on think you're saying is the city could be your host by providing additional funds, but we're limited in our amenities to actually take this event to the next level other than providing funding. So a true host would be a partnership with Colonial Williamsburg.
I don't know what the city, and it's just maybe on my end or maybe on your end, I don't know what the city's vision is for being that partner or that host.
Okay.
As I've understood it, the city's objective with these dollars is to launch new things.
Right.
We are not a new thing, and I don't really want every year to have to come up with a new thing to request funding for. I want us to do the thing we do better and better and better, and that will mean new things being added onto it. I'm confident of that, but I think having that partnership makes sense. If the city has that same vision, again, there's that above the line things that are funded on an annual basis, like the Kings Mill Championship, for example, and there's the below the line things that request annually. I would like to think an occasion has, over 50 years, earned a spot above the line, but that gets further into the thinking and the dynamics than I have personally chosen to venture. So.
Gotcha. Any other questions?
Sure.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you all very much.
The second request comes from Culture Fix, and we have Steve Rose here to speak on behalf of Culture Fix.
Good morning, Council, and thanks for this opportunity this morning. Click through Stuart's and get to mine, I guess. Am I going forward, Stuart? Am I?
No.
Yeah, going back.
No, the other way.
No. There we go. Culture Fix. Okay, so Culture Fix. I want to give you all a brief, I know you've seen the logo around town. We're very, very busy. We're doing lots of fun things in town. We've created a nonprofit, a 501c3, 2 years ago, and in that time, we've taken a lot of the events that have been created earlier over the past 7 to 8 years and put them under one umbrella. And so it's been over 10 years as my brainchild of trying to create some umbrella organization that we could put a lot of these great events underneath. The model is Fest Events in Norfolk, where the city there made a conscious effort to fund an organization that would then take care of their events. And basically they have a $3 million budget and they put on all of the events in Town Point Park, and I'm sure most people here at some point have been to one of those events. We're a very small organization as far as our board, and that's intentional. I just want to go through very quickly. I don't need much explanation for myself. I've been in town 20 years, have Williamsburg Event Rentals. We support many, many nonprofits in town through in-kind donations. Those donations are well over $500,000 in support for the nonprofits in town over that 20-year span. Jen Rains has a store in town that's art-related. She's very passionate about music and culture in this town. Her commitment to the community is obvious in the fact that she's opening a second store this Sunday right downtown. Shirley Vermillion is the brainchild behind Second Sunday's Arts Festival, which is 10 times a year. She's put in thousands of hours, literally thousands of hours over that 7-year period. And that's just her passion. She moved from Seattle, Washington, where they have lots of festivals and street festivals, and just decided that this is something she needed to do. I've been in the background throughout those 7 years, providing tents, tables, chairs, stages, all on a donation basis. And we've created a great festival. Todd Cook manages the Kimball Theater, or did, still works there now on a consulting basis. He's our sound production, lighting guy that gives us the experience that we need. He was the motivation that when CW decided to close the Kimball, gave us that opportunity to say that we could step in there if necessary and take over the Kimball Theater. That wasn't just a pie-in-the-sky idea that we had that we could do that. He ran it every day, so we could have literally taken the keys the following day and done that. Odessa Dowdy is a jewelry artist, very creative thinker, and we use her for the out-of-the-box thinking that we love to do. David Miller He's an engineer with Dominion. He's retiring in June, and he wanted something to spend a lot of time on. He comes to a lot of our events, and he's the one that balances out my crazy offset this way. He's much more of a balanced, let's look at the budget this way. So we somehow meet in the middle. Well, try. And then Wendy, his wife, is a professional photographer, attended a lot of our events, and just basically said, these are awesome events. We need professional photography for those, and we use that in our marketing. Our mission, for the most part, it's very general in that it basically promotes culture throughout the colonial Williamsburg area, the greater Williamsburg area, and through lots of different ways. The main thing here is that it's out-of-the-box thinking and risk-taking. That's what we like to see. That was put into our mission on purpose, that calculated risk-taking is necessary, especially in the event business. If everything's done by the budget, then very often things get cut. And that's not the way I think. The current lineup of events that we have, Second Sunday's Art and Music Festival, so that's 10 festivals a year. And that can be seen as, a small little hometown festival that takes 2 blocks downtown. But it's somewhere between 40 and 80 artists every time. We have 4 stages, so over 8 different acts of music every time. We're expanding all the time on that and trying to add new things. We added a beer garden this year in front of Amber Rocks because they're a new neighbor in the area. We have street performers, as you see right there. The Silver Man, he's actually the chef at the Hound's Tail, which nobody really knows. But so it's just a really cool festival. And when we look at it from a tourism point, we can look at it as a little small community festival. But the reality is, the way I look at it, when I book travel, I'm booking 10 days out, a week out, maybe even 3 hours out when I decide to travel. And I go on Google, I search for some place to go to, and when I look, if I decide I'm going away for a couple of days, I go, let's go to Charlottesville, let's go to Culpeper, let's go to Lynchburg. What I first do is look at their calendar of events. That's what I do. Because I just don't necessarily want to go to Charlottesville next weekend. I want to go to Charlottesville if there's an event happening that weekend. So when people look, so as long as it's marketed correctly, and that's where we need to go, I feel, in the town, is trying to make sure that we're marketing the things that we have already. So this is 10 opportunities a year where I feel that if somebody searched Williamsburg who already thought they would like to come to Williamsburg, they've already got it on their checklist to come, and they see that there's a street festival on that day or that weekend when it ties into their plans, that's going to be the little bit of incentive that makes them come. When they're here, they're going to go to Jamestown. They're going to go to Colonial Williamsburg. But the reality is, I class those things as like a passive piece as far as, what you can do when you come to Williamsburg. And I call it passive just because it's there all the time. So there's no real urgency for anybody to come to go to Colonial Williamsburg or to go to Jamestown. So therefore, they can keep putting it off. And so this is the type of thing that we've created that we feel is a real opportunity that gives the inspiration to come to town. The Chowder Festival is now in its 7th year. I look around, I know a lot of you have come to this event. We started out in Jamestown. This last year it was over in High Street. 500 to 600 people attended every year consistently. We work with 12 or 13 different restaurants in town and caterers, for them to showcase their product. And we have a musical act as well. We've tried to expand that. We have the Big Bluesy, which we created on a standalone weekend in September. It's very difficult to pay for that infrastructure for a large festival like that without any kind of funding and support. So we tied it together this last year with the Chowder Festival so that we could use the same tent that's put up for the Chowder Festival, and we had about 1,100 attendees. We're still looking at that weekend with the Big Bluesy. It's a lot of music that we provide. It's very expensive, over $15,000 worth of musical acts over the Saturday and the Sunday. And so we continue to look into that weekend as to whether or not that can become more of a culinary weekend, maybe with music, and just, again, creating it into a 2 or 3 day weekend like we have, but maybe tweaking it to see how we can draw people. The perks of doing the job, I get to sample all the chowder. The Winter Blues Jazz Fest, one of our great success stories. We'll be in our 5th year this next year. It's in January. We picked a downtime of the year in January where pretty much everybody can agree there is nothing happening in town. It's Martin Luther King weekend every year, so it's a 3-day weekend. We work with local partners. We've teamed up with CW with their with their location. So we have room nights that we can track there, which is really good. We use their main facility. We have almost a $26,000 bill with Colonial Williamsburg after that weekend. So it's a good amount of income to the area. We try to tie all our events to different locations, which include the Kimball Theatre, the Muscarelli Museum, the Williamsburg Winery. We really spread it all over town, and we do between 8 and 9 events starting from Thursday through Sunday. The 8 events are pretty much sold out every year now. So the nice thing about this event is that marketing-wise, we don't necessarily need to spend a ton of money on marketing it. We have a list of all the people who have bought tickets for the last 4 years. We send it back out to them, and within the first month, we probably sell 50% of the tickets. And then it's new people coming into town and locals who are finding out about it. So again, what we need for these events is infrastructure and money to pay for larger acts so that we could then increase the size of the space and the amount of people that can come to the event. Kimball tribute shows. We do approximately 4 a year. Again, they can be anything from the Beatles to Dylan. We're working on right now. That's the Motown show in June. And again, you can easily look at this and just say it's 250 or 300 people in the Kimball Theatre for the local community. I don't see it that way. I see it as, again, I'm looking for somewhere to go. I'm a Beatles fan. Just so happens there's a Beatles tribute show on Saturday night. Let's go to Williamsburg that weekend, as opposed to not that weekend or another weekend. So it gives people a reason to come to town. We're currently working in partnership with CW and the Summer Breeze concert that's been every year. About 8 concerts a year they do. We're trying to expand that. I met with them. We talked about Culture Fix doing a shoulder season of concerts, maybe before or after, and we decided why not try to create something a little larger. So the concept would be that it would be like Summer Breeze Unleashed. It would be larger, may move locations just across the street where the Funhouse Fest is. We're working on all those logistics. It'll be 16 weeks. I already have all that music lined up. We'd be able to add beer and wine to that, and it really would make it more of an after-hours concert, which I know a lot of people have asked for. We've talked about it on the top of the parking deck. We've talked about it in different locations at the community building. But here we already have something that is substantial, that has a following. Why would we try to create something different? It's much better to partner with other organizations. We work with the Occasion for the Arts in Stewart for their opening kickoff event, and we're working with them now in discussion about this year and the 50th and how we can help out with that. Past events that I've done that have been very successful, we just decided to phase them out because after 10 years of doing them with no funding, it can get pretty challenging. So the Chocolate Affair was a huge hit. It was 400 to 450 people every year. For I think 8 years I did that. All of that money was given back to the community. Over $80,000 were given back to the community through that event and a concert series in the summertime. Chocolate Chariot Race, again, was a crazy experience in Newtown where people would dress up in teams, run around the town. That's the type of stuff that creates great press for a location, a locality. You see it even on CNN sometimes where they'll announce, some crazy wife-carrying competition in Norway or something. But it gets there and it makes these crazy, So those are the types of things. I was a little ahead of the game on that one, because now we have these breweries in town, those types of guys. Those are the guys that would be able to pull something like that off really well. That younger generation doing some kind of crazy race through the middle of town, stopping at the locations. So that's, again, we would love to bring that back. Other initiatives, again, Culture Fix is not just about events. That's our main focus right now. But as you see on the top left there, a mural. It's on the side of my warehouse. It's 12 feet tall. It's 50 feet wide. It's one of the only murals in the area. Again, challenged James City County to allow me to do it. They said, if it's a sign, you can't have it. It's not a sign. It doesn't say anything about my business. There was no ordinance. We painted the building. So, again, people come by sometimes, bring their kids, look at it, just love that inspiration. Front lawn of the, where the Funhouse Fest is located, we did the pop-up cycling event when the championships were in Richmond. again, they came, they spieled to us, it'd be great if you guys could get involved. As a locality, there was no real motivation within government to try to create something like that. So we decided, let's just make it happen. Worked with Colonial Williamsburg, took about 6 weeks and a 20-page contract, but they let us use the front lawn. And that was, I think, one of the things that inspired them to use that lawn space. And now, obviously, we have Funhouse Fest out there. Performing arts space, obviously, where I'm always looking for new and cool ways to have spaces in town. Investing in culture, we talk about that all the time. Chesapeake Bank's a great supporter of ours. We have a few other companies that are working with us, WMBG, Tide Radio. Those are the guys that we work with. Basically, just very quickly on the numbers, again, for a small organization, kind of like Stuart said, trying to collect data and analyze it is very time-consuming. The big organizations are good at that. Our budget this year will be around about $245,000. That's a lot of money to turn over, take in, put out, for a completely volunteer organization. Over 16 events per year. When you add them up, if we add Summer Breeze, that's another 16. That's 32 events that we'll be doing for the town. All the volunteer staff to date. It's over 4,500 tickets sold annually, and it's estimated about 8,000 visitors to Second Sundays. Again, a little bit of data. It's kind of tough to read, but it shows that from Winter Blues Jazz Fest, we are bringing people in from out of town. Those are the tickets that are purchased on the left. Some of those are multi-day tickets, so it might be the same person. On the right, this time when people buy a ticket, we actually have them ask a question. We ask them a question that says, did you stay overnight? Did you live locally, friends and family? So that we can try and get that data, because otherwise it's very difficult to get that data. So this year, as you can see, hotel, motel, and timeshares combined is around 260 responses that said that they did that. So if that's 260 responses, each of those, that's a ticket order. So that could be one person up to 4 people buying tickets, and most of the people, based on Colonial Williamsburg's statistics for the lodge, most people stayed more than one night. So potentially there could be 500 or 600 room nights there just for that Saturday night, which we thought was excellent. That's pretty much what I have. Any questions?
Mr. Ramsey?
Well, I would say I must be an event junkie because I have been to every single one of the events that you mentioned up there. And just to go on what you were saying about the Jazz Festival, we were talking to a couple at one of the events, and they were from Hampton, but their children had bought them a package to come to Williamsburg, and so they came up and spent the night, went out to eat, and went to the event. So it is true that it is drawing a much larger group of people demographically, age-wise and location-wise. And going back to what Benny had commented on before, as far as making Williamsburg sort of a destination for events, I assume similar to what Fest Events has done in Norfolk, what do you see as sort of our optimum number that you would like to see as key signature events in town? And does that 16 events that you mentioned, does that include the 10 Second Sundays?
Yes.
And then 6 other key ones outside of that?
Yeah. So again, I mean, it's really difficult to sort of put a number on signature events, and the whole concept of a signature event is, what is a signature event? So I believe that the best scenario moving forward would be that the city council, we sit down and we try to work out what it is. What is the calendar of events that we would want? That's what they did in Norfolk. They sat down with Fest Events and said, how many weekends does it make sense? They're a much bigger city than we are. So all of these events, we create, even if we look at Funhouse Fest as a very large event, and you look at the numbers, there's a tremendous amount of locals that go to that event. Those locals aren't going to buy that $80, $90, or $100 ticket, every other weekend. It's just not going to happen. And if you don't have them doing that, then you don't have the revenue for the event. You're then relying on people to come from out of town, which is a tremendous amount of marketing. So I think we have to be really careful trying to just create these big signature events. That's why I say that something like Second Sundays, if we have Second Sundays, let's try to work together with other organizations to put other events on the same weekend. When people start to think about an event, they're like, let's find a weekend that's empty. I don't agree with that. Let's find a weekend that already has some cool stuff going on it, Right now, Grand Illumination, the numbers out there that it's 20,000 people or 30,000 people come. They watch the fireworks and they go home. Let's give them a full weekend of activities that weekend. Let's create a Christmas market, for 2 days or 3 days so that some of that 20,000 stay over and spend their money here. I think that's what we're not doing that well. I think we're all trying to work individually, create our own event and be successful. And that's just not, I don't think, the way to move forward. So that's where Culture Fix, the whole concept, is that we try to partner with people. So partner with Occasion for the Arts, add an event there and help them out because they're already stretched, with their budget for what they do. So if we can work together with the city, with Colonial Williamsburg, and create some of the weekends that we already have and make them bigger, I think that's a better way to go. As far as just saying, let's have 6 signature events a year, We already have Occasion for the Arts, that's 1. We already have Funhouse Fest, that's 2. We already have the Winter Blues Jazz Fest, that's 3. And then if you put in the Chowder Fest weekend and create that, that's 4. So for a small destination to have 4 full-on weekend events, that's pretty good. And then you add in second Sundays.
Well, and I think you, also as a sports fan, I think you can also look at William and Mary home football games and things like that.
Absolutely,
to try and
absolutely, all of it. But it needs to be
partner.
tied together as a package to market it, so that people, and that it's the calendar. I mean, I know we have a calendar. We're all trying to create that one calendar for the town, and it's very difficult because if people can just start their own calendar. But I think that's the most important part, is when someone Google searches that the events that we have going on are what pops up. Create that urgency for them to come.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Rose, thanks for coming in, and thanks for all that you've done over the last 20 years. I know that you and I certainly go way back many years to inclusion and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And we had a good time doing that, and thank you. What's important for me is that, Williamsburg kind of remains that cultural, epicenter, and all the activities happen here. And I think with Occasion for the Arts and a lot of what you're talking about, and the Chambers Williamsburg Taste Festival this weekend are good examples of doing that. In your experience, when you go around and look at other communities that you mentioned fest events, is it common that private industry kind of puts on these events, or is there some sort of funding that goes along to help? I know there's sponsorship, but do you see municipalities funding these things and other destinations?
Nearly every one that we go to, it's a municipality, has some connection to it. And a lot of them, it's through an admissions tax, and I know we had that big discussion last year, but literally, that admissions tax, if it's an 8 or a 10% tax, that is directly, a lot of them use that just directly and fund it straight back to the events, because it's created from an event, it's taken from an event, you give it back. And so fest events, as I say, fest event is $3 million that they've decided. It's not up for discussion every year, it's written into the budget, and it fluctuates, a little bit each year, just depending on how they need to tweak it. But Fest Events has 16 full-time staff, director all the way down to administrative assistant, just to create the events for the city. And here we don't have one.
Going back to using the Occasion for the Arts, which is a 501c, I believe, as well, and that's something that's gone on now for 50 years, and the people that started it have moved on. What do you see the future for Culture Fix once Steve Rose?
Hopefully it's bright, and that's one of the reasons that I created Culture Fix, to be very honest with you. Over 15 years, the amount of things that I've done for the community. And, I'm not about to leave and not do them. But I want to make sure that, all of these events that we've spent hours and hours and hours creating, don't go away. That if Shirley Vermillion decides to move back to Seattle, I don't want second Sundays to go away. And we and the city should think that that's extremely important, that we make sure that it doesn't. But there aren't people just rushing in there to take over thousands of hours of volunteer time to take over second Sundays. There are a lot of nonprofit organizations in town. So I think there's somewhere there that city has to decide, where is that threshold of events and where do we want to make sure that we maintain what we have. There's always the discussion as to how can we make it bigger, how can we add more, how can we do this. But the reality is, same with Stewart, I feel, if they don't get funding, that should be, for me, that's a signature event. There's absolutely no doubt that Occasion for the Arts should be funded every year in the budget, separate from Culture Fix. I'm not just here to, shout for Culture Fix. I'm here for culture within the community that encourages tourism and makes the place a cool space. So there are certain things. First night, perfect example. 3,000 to 5,000 people bought a ticket to that every year. That's a lot of people that would have an experience, who would talk about that experience to their kids, to their parents, to their grandparents. That some of them were from out of town, and they would go away saying that they had a great New Year's Eve in Williamsburg. That's PR, that's marketing, and that's gone, just like that, poof. That's an organization, again, that was 20 years, 25 years, but because it was completely volunteer-driven, it's just very difficult when a big board changes hands like it did in that case, because a lot of people stayed for a long time. It just went away. And cities should be concerned about that, That's a New Year's Eve celebration, and yeah, hopefully we'll create something new. But I think it could have been saved, and it could have been morphed into something a little more concise, and would have been a great thing for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for coming in today and presenting about Culture Fix, but also to broaden the discussion on the place where special events have in the city and promoting tourism and our vibrancy in that regard. I do appreciate your tenacity and creative energy that Culture Fix has done and moving the ball in terms of having that discussion with the city's new tourism development fund. I have no questions. I think all the questions have been answered so far, and pretty content with that, but just wanted to express my gratitude as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Paul? I don't have to recognize you.
Mustering up my voice. Mr. Rose, thank you very much for being here today. When we look at some of the events that you are currently doing and some others that you've done over the past, and I did have an unfortunate flashback to a chocolate chariot race moment. We'll go there.
He carried me on his back.
I'm still recovering.
Was there a quorum there that day?
Yeah. So, but the point is that what you have done and what you continue to do is exactly what we talk about when we use these terms like downtown vibrancy, or creating a sense of dynamic community, making Williamsburg an interesting place, rebranding it in a new way that causes people to give us a second and third look, and not only to consider coming back, but when they come here, to stay longer. And I think that the Winter Blues Jazz Festival, and not to just pick that one out, but because it happens at a particularly slow period in the year, and it has been very successful, and it seems to have some momentum and ability to continue, along with the other events you do, and then complementing that with Second Sunday, which it's a much different environment. It's a different audience, but it still has an interesting allure. It still creates a level of uniqueness in our community that sets us apart, and that's the type of thing we need to find. I applaud you for your efforts with the Summer Breeze Festival to turn that into something a little bit different, a little bit more organized and structured, and a regular attraction that people can count on, albeit these all seem to be weather dependent, so I know that's a challenge.
Indoor field house.
Yeah. So, or performance hall. So I just want to thank you for that. Many, many years ago, and this way predates Ms. Reardon's time here with the Chamber, but I remember having, it's probably 10 years ago, having a conversation with then representatives of the Chamber about what can we do to create more events here, to make Williamsburg a more interesting place, to have something along the lines of a fest events. Maybe not that scale, not that grand. We don't need that. But something that really puts us on the right path. And the response I got was, we don't create events, we just market them. Somebody's got to create the events. And the city is not an event creator. Trust me, that would not be our strength. So I really want to applaud you for the efforts that you've undertaken over the past 15 to 20 years to create events, to make Williamsburg an interesting place. I'm not sure exactly where council sits on this or what our end decision will be, But I think you've demonstrated a track record that is deserving of this community's support. And all those names that you put on that slide early on, those are all volunteers. Those people are not getting paid to do the work that they do to make this community a special place. If we can find a way to somehow support them and help them do their job better, it's going to help draw more people to this community, more people who will spend more money, and it enhances the quality of life for all those people who live here across the demographic scale. So I just want to say thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
I can't say any more than Paul did, but
I'll try.
but I'm going to anyway. All these things, Steve, go to building brand. And Williamsburg has suffered from a one-note brand for too long. So anytime you get 250 to 300 people together, and that spreads awareness that there's something else going on here, we're better served for it. I sense your sense of urgency that you want to take this to the next level. I also appreciate that, yes, locals love these events, and locals are probably your primary attendees. But if you look at any great event that goes on throughout Eastern Virginia or Central Virginia, that started as a local event that everyone loved,
Absolutely.
that had legs, and so I think you've got a number of those that have that potential. I really like your idea of filling out the year and giving that extra, tying on to existing, marquee events that this community enjoys. I think as a community we have to make this work, because as far as brand diversification goes, as far as investing in our downtown, it's essential. Just look at Second Sundays and the way it's been able to migrate on up Prince George Street into that new Viver space. That's the energy that plays off of energy. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to also say thank you again. But back to Second Sundays, I think that the scope and the breadth and depth of it has really expanded. If you look around, you see not only locals, but tourists and families and singles and couples. So, I mean, it fills all kinds of niches and a place for everyone to go on a Sunday afternoon.
And it's really hardly marketed at all. Right. So that's the reality, that if it was, then it could become something, much more widespread for its participation.
Just for my edification, how close are you to having an inked deal on those two CW efforts?
Well, I have 16 bands already signed up, so I haven't signed their contracts, but I'm very close. Right now, it's down to the location, and we're talking to the city about that.
Gotcha.
But it's a done deal as long as we can work out and I'm pretty sure at this point it's a done deal. It's just a matter of where we host it.
Excellent.
And what we can do.
So if I may, one thing staff needs at this point is budgetary direction, budget work session. So Occasion for the Arts had a outside agency funding request of $25,000. Culture Fix had an outside agency funding request of $75,000. Staff put in the proposed budget $150,000 in the Tourism Marketing Contingency Fund. A portion of that could be allocated to these outside agency funding requests. So one option is reduce the $150,000 to $50,000 for anything new that comes in during the year, and go ahead and allocate a full or portion thereof of the requests. You could leave the $150,000, option 2, intact for tourism contingency fund and bring in some of the reserves for whatever the funding amount is, or not fund, option 3. But if I may request council to have that funding discussion and preferences so that these agencies and staff have direction on funding.
Are you also approaching James City County and York County?
At this point, not, because as you can tell, we've focused more of our events in the city over the past year because of the motivation of council to.
Right. And given an investment, you would see that trend continue?
Absolutely, and definitely.
Part of his request also is he'd like to see maybe a 3-year commitment.
Right. build some real programming.
It's very difficult to plan ahead, to commit to these events, not knowing,
And Marvin, we have the sort of on the sort of rough sketch, the $150,000 going to the Tourism Contingency Fund. But if we found additional requirements or needs later on in the year that we felt strongly about, can that be increased from the reserves?
Yes.
So we could put additional funding back
If
in
known
there.
requests now, if another need came in the future, council always has the ability to appropriate. There was a comment about a 3-year funding commitment, and the city attorney can.
This council doesn't have the authority to bind future councils with the creation of next year's budget and the following budget. Council will always have that decision to either continue that funding or not. You can certainly articulate this council's intent to continue that function, but next council doesn't necessarily have to continue that.
So no valid contract.
So if we wanted to try to take some of these requests and put them into more of a tourism maintenance kind of category, that could be our suggestion, even though we don't have the
Yes, and
allocation
you could certainly categorize it that way. Next year, council will always have the ability to take funding out of that category.
So, Marvin, help me understand why this funding of Culture Fix and Occasion has to be from the Tourism Contingency Fund and not part of TDF or just general maintenance of effort of these other outside agencies.
It does not. That's part of what I'm saying. You can break that out and reduce the funding. There's funding available for that tourism marketing fund, but they're asking as an outside agency request, which is different than that.
Right.
One option is always come back and go through that process, and there's a policy and process that's not the budget process for that kind of request. That's not this request here. That's just where staff is recommending to take the money if you want to do the outside agency request as a continuing effort.
Does anybody have any more questions for Steve? We can let him sit down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's one follow-up question to that?
Sure.
Please. Thank you. So for my understanding of the Tourism Marketing Contingency Fund is that typically from just the one time, I think we used it for Botticelli funding for Muscarel, it's used for one-time kind of use events, right? So this one is asking for more sustained funding. So how does that pair up with the policy of the Marketing Contingency Fund?
Correct. That this is not a tourism contingency fund request. This is an outside agency funding request, which is similar to the maintenance of effort request. In the past, council asked to have a specific discussion about the outside agency funding requests and funding levels, and this is that opportunity. It's not
This
a
is within the
request.
tourism fund.
If it was a tourism marketing contingency fund request, they wouldn't be here today. They would submit an application, it would go to a work session, and then council decision at a council meeting after there's money in that.
So I think you said that we could keep the 150 contingency marketing fund allocation and just take from the reserves to fund these two outside.
If so chose, yes. Whatever direction from council, staff will adjust the budget to reflect that.
And just say a word about the Tourism Contingency Fund. When that was set up before, council created the guidelines for that. Whatever guidelines were in place then can be retained and continue to be used, or we can change them. It's totally up to this body how we want to structure that fund. And the way it had been set up before was that, and jump in here if you know something differently, that it was going to be either a new or expanded event, and that generally the money was to be used towards marketing and promotion of the event to bring in.
Right. Okay.
And so let me just some clarity. Do we as a council agree that we want to support these two?
Yes.
Yeah, the consensus is there, just a question of how.
Right. Okay. Right. So I'm comfortable with supporting it at the requested level for both.
Same.
So So for the reserves, is that coming from the tourism fund that we're talking about? This is general fund
Maybe you can
reserves.
pull up the chart.
Tourism fund.
Tourism fund reserves, right, okay. Under
Whatever form that eventually takes.
Right, whether, however the money gets in there, it would be from that 2.9.
So for the,
Right.
for the sake of time, staff will amend the budget to include the requests as requested with the revenue coming from the Tourism Development Fund reserves.
Okay.
And if we end up with something that looks like this, and that still remains to be seen, that tourism marketing contingency money, if it is not spent on another purpose, can go back into the tourism.
It will always
Fund
revert
reserves.
back to reserves and get reappropriated in the next budget.
Just one more question with that TDF. So, coming from the TDF reserve funds, this is the fund that later on, based on what this city council had passed, will form a committee to determine the applications for funding from these funds, right? But these two written into the budget will already be there. So they're not subject to additional committee review, anything like that, right?
That's what I'm hearing from council today.
So as of this is probably the first two projects we'd be funding from the Tourism Development Fund.
With the other administrative expenditures and things on the budget this year, but it is very limited to reserve as much possible for the grant program
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
envisioned by council.
Just want to make sure that was out there.
And we still haven't determined the funding stream for the tourism development fund. It's a later conversation.
You're right, right.
And so just as a pause for a sec. With the exception of Botticelli, where has the tourism contingency fund money gone? Majority of it has gone to events that will now be funded through Culture Fix, if my recollection is correct. So we still have that pot of money sitting there, $150,000 tourism contingency. Would it be best to do this out of that, since so many of those entities were already requesting of that fund?
Yes, but then I think we ought to also clarify what the contingency guidelines are.
Right.
You know, whether it's has to be a new program or
Right.
continuing something.
So that's the question for us. Should we reevaluate, like to Paul's point, should we reevaluate our council policies for the tourism contingency fund?
Right.
Make that an ongoing obligation. Sure.
Ask the EDA
I was just thinking that, yeah.
some input.
Right.
Um,
And just one follow-up question for Marvin. On Ms. Dameron's slide she has up here, we have $80,000 for the Virginia Arts Festival. Is that all? Does that include what we give for Funhouse Fest?
That's Funhouse Fest, the annual request and the supplemental in FY18.
So that's the total of all three of those things.
So already we have reduced as we were just proposing. If we add in these new requests, the TDF goes 162 down to 152. So we already took some out of that to put into the Arts Festival.
So the tourism maintenance of effort is a transfer from the general fund. That's none of the new tourism development fund revenues.
Balance available for tourism development would be greater
Actually,
had we not done that.
2.9.
Under the TDF on the slide, the WABMAC, the tourism marketing contingency, and tourism development fund expenditure lines all come from the tourism development fund revenues, the new revenues. So that's where the new money was. The rest is contingency of effort.
But it's nonetheless, it lowered the balance of the TDF.
Correct. Whether you take it from reserves or the tourism marketing contingency fund, they're both being recommended funding from tourism development fund revenues.
So I made that point because this is not, I mean, these two aren't the first time we've dipped into the reserve fund for the TDF.
Right. So to Doug's point and to Paul's point, let's refer, I'm committed to funding both of these at the request. Let's do so out of the contingency fund send the contingency fund policies back to the EDA for recommendations on what's best for moving forward. Is there a consensus around that?
I would agree with that.
I agree with that.
My only question would be, trying to overcomplicate this, but do we want to wait to hear what the EDA has to say before we make the final decision about whether it comes out of the contingency fund or out of the TDF reserve?
Want them to hear what, no, I'm just kidding.
Well,
You want them to tell you what you want them
it's
to
ultimately a
tell you.
council decision.
Right.
EDA would just be weighing in on what they thought was best moving forward.
And whatever EDA recommends, you can always adjust the budget later at that time. At this point, we need to have a budget ready for council to adopt in May. So if either of those funds works, they're both coming from the same revenues. If you have a preference, we'll put that in. Originally, it was reserves, but we can just reduce the contingency fund amount to $50,000 and then add those other two items in.
I think that's fine.
And they can come back with a recommendation on future policies.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm on board with that.
So you okay with that, Barbara?
Yeah, and then we can adjust as we go along.
All right. Sounds good.
We don't
We don't need a motion for that, do we? We're just giving the manager direction?
Just direction to staff
Right.
today. And we also covered number 2, the tourism marketing contingency fund in that.
Well, we're just rolling.
Rolling on. Downtown vibrancy request of the EDA. Ms. Stammer.
Sure. At this point, I'll leave the slide here. We had asked earlier about the Tourism Development Fund expenditure of $150,000. That was put in at the request of the Economic Development Authority to have funds available for downtown vibrancy. And we do have in the audience today Adam Steely, who's available to answer any questions you might have in regard to that request.
If I may, just very briefly, the downtown vibrancy plan, implementation hasn't been finalized yet, but it's anticipated within the next year that will happen. And so from previous discussion with council and staff, and the EDA's had significant discussion on it, they just wanted to have some placeholder amount to be able to kickstart an initial project if needed. If it's not needed in this fiscal year, it'll just resolve back to the balance. It's not specifically earmarked for the EDA, but it is consistent with that amount and available if the EDA brought a future request to council. Council would have the ability to then approve it and specifically appropriate it later.
But it is for, or the idea is that it will be for the downtown vibrancy area and to implement some parts of the study.
It is acknowledging that specific request from the EDA. Council will have the ability to specifically appropriate later based on the request.
Doug? Comments?
So why wouldn't we necessarily wait till the next comprehensive plan comes out? Why need to allocate this funding for this year if we can do it for the next fiscal year when the comp plan is out, finalized, and got a plan ready to roll out for funding?
The downtown vibrancy plan may be completed in advance of the comp plan, and there may be opportunities that arise from the community or from the EDA that would like attention. I mean, there's a couple options here. This is acknowledging a request of an appointed board to formally set aside an amount of money in the event something comes up. They're not saying that they know specifically what that is, but it may. The other option is you leave it in reserves, and the money's there also if a specific thing comes up and you can appropriate from reserves at that time. This is just acknowledging the request of an appointed board in the budget process to be prepared in the event it's needed.
So, no, sorry to jump ahead. Go ahead. We've been discussing the MLK Memorial, making that a part of, could be the kickoff project for the downtown vibrancy. I know that there has been somewhat of an unofficial communication from a community partner saying that they would match up to a certain value, assuming the city made that same commitment. assuming these funds requested by the EDA could be used for that purpose.
I thought that we had created an account with the Community Foundation.
Different topic. Yeah.
I thought the MLK Memorial was brought up.
It is, but that account is to hold funds. We can use it for that topic. But
sure,
this offer of a match was contingent on the city committing a certain dollar value.
Okay.
So that money has to come from somewhere. It can sit in that account, sure.
Sure.
But they're related, but not.
Well, that's interesting because my understanding was that we could start implementing some of the simple placemaking, like making bike lanes, adding more benches, but that certainly adds an interesting twist to the conversation.
Part of the downtown vibrancy plan does talk about monument and placemaking, not monument per se.
It's broad enough that it could be used for
exactly
the policy itself. Huh,
so
interesting.
I'm assuming that those funds could be used for that project.
Council has the ability, if they find that that's consistent with their tourism fund policy, to do so. Council also has the ability to appropriate funds when that request formalizes from other places, whether it be capital contingency or operating contingency later in the fiscal year.
Okay.
If so directed by council, staff will make the funds available.
All right. Sure.
I'm trying to ask a question. Can you explain to me what the downtown vibrancy request is?
Adam, you're on.
Morning.
Morning.
So I apologize. I should have had a slide, obviously. In the proposed report we got from our consultants about the downtown vibrancy plan, there was a not specific, but indicated rollout of steps that could be taken to make the appropriate impact that we wanted downtown. Some of those steps were very simple and required very little effort on the part of other city departments, planning, public works. So we wanted some money available in the budget, as the EDA was probably the most the body most suited to take action in a short time frame to approve something. And the things we had in mind were not unrelated to Culture Fix's vision, but a slightly different spin. We were talking about temporary mini parks that could pop up in a downtown area for visitors to enjoy, temporary pop-up retail experiences, artistic or entertainment, interactive features that would be there for a temporary purpose outside this building or in front of the community building, places where we could engage the public in downtown, things that were not intended to stay and didn't involve infrastructure changes or investments. What we didn't want to necessarily have to do was to come to City Council and say, we've had a request to put a mini park in a parking space in front of this building and it'll take $1,400 of investment to make that happen. We don't have that money. If there's a budget available, then we could look at that and say, this is what we're going to dedicate that money for. So it was for the sort of low-hanging fruit, if you will, from the downtown vibrancy plan, which, as the city manager has pointed out, has not been formally adopted. They're working through the implementation steps. We fully expect that effort will be complete, but after your budget is finished. And so what we didn't want to do was overcomplicate your process of having to come look for incrementally small amounts of money to make what we hope will be high impact but temporary changes to the downtown landscape to engage visitors and locals alike.
Do you have a dollar amount in mind?
Well, that was the $150,000 that we submitted.
That we just took 100 of.
No, the next line. If you'll look down, we were looking at the next one. We had initially proposed $150,000, and that was based on some work that the Economic Development Director had looked at with the estimated cost of 5 to 6 pop-up events, installations that might carry with them a cost of $10,000 to $20,000, depending on how long they lasted and what they included. But usually there's some infrastructure costs, some labor costs to bring people in. So we were looking for things that we could do throughout the year assuming if and when we get a final approved version that you have all seen and liked, and that the city manager was able to then implement at your direction.
So the downtown vibrancy, the 150 request from the EDA, is that TDF expenditure line item.
Correct.
So why do we label it TDF expenditure?
We can change that to whatever council would like.
I think something that's really descriptive of what it's going to be used for would be helpful.
Well,
Yeah, that's what I was confused earlier as well.
So at this point, staff is seeking that direction. If council is supportive of the EDA request, then we can put downtown vibrancy implementation as a line item. If council just wanted to have a set amount set aside in case a different request came in beyond the EDAs, then that provided flexibility in that wording to use it as council saw fit. But staff is open to whatever direction council.
So that's again taking away, that's drawing down the TDF fund, right? Because it's going from the TDF, the 150.
Correct. Council would be acknowledging that there are potential expenditures of tourism fund nature that may happen prior to the grant process being formally set up, and putting some small contingency amount aside to address those requests.
And again, we were talking about potentially considering 3 line items for the TDF without a commission and without
No, just one, because we're required to have the other 2. WADMAC is required.
No, the 2 being considering the special events that we just heard from.
No, that's coming out of the tourism marketing right, it is coming out of that line item. I see what you mean.
It's reestablishing.
Right.
No, I just wanted to get that out there. I thought that was important just to kind of formulate my own thoughts on this as well. I have no problem with the downtown vibrancy thing. I think based on what you've said, Mr. Chairman, not to take you away from this, it's made sense. I was a little confused as to what the request was before, but thanks for clarifying.
Sure, and to be clear, the EDA understands that the majority of the things that whatever body you establish to review requests for tourism development funds will be probably far more substantial in their nature than the kinds of things the EDA is discussing. We're not looking to shortcut that process or sideline.
Not suggesting that you are, it's just... Right.
This would basically be just to empower the EDA to take advantage of things that come up.
Within the coming fiscal year, I think there's some work that the City Council is going to have to do in order to implement a long-term strategy for the tourism investments that we are all discussing and that this fund is going to look for. But the last thing we would like to do is, if there's a general consensus that we should move forward on a downtown vibrancy initiative, we don't further our own efforts if we delay everything a year until we can have all of our pieces in place. Right. So we'd like to be able to take some small-scale steps that add to that vibrancy without trying to make any long-term commitments on anybody's part.
We had the downtown vibrancy always listed.
It's been a part of the EDA's strategic plan for many, many years, and what we're trying to do is put some dollars into it.
And we funded a study that brought back, some great ideas, and
correct.
Those great ideas are going to take some money to back them up, and I think this is how we make these ideas happen. I was really engaged in the communications at the revealing of that study, and I think that there's some great opportunities there, and so this is how we get it done. Yeah. This is how we begin to get it done.
Right.
Yeah.
This becomes a placeholder for the money so that it's available.
Correct.
If the EDA determines there's value in some of these initial recommendations from the survey.
Well, I do know that Ms. Matsumoto and Ms. DeWitt are looking into ideas. I cannot bring any formal proposal at this time for any of the expenditures we're talking about, but we would really like to move forward knowing that the will of council is to agree that we should move forward quickly and take some short steps.
I think we have some great synergy now with what's happening with Culture Fix, Occasion for the Arts, and now with this downtown vibrancy to really set this up, this downtown area as a real destination for that experiential tourism.
And I guess as a policy matter, if let's say you want to do temporary pop-ups during one part of the season, that request will still have to come in front of council.
I'm going to leave the city manager.
Because zoning and also line funding requests, right?
No, it wouldn't come before council. The council's funding policy is anything that is above 100,000 comes to council for approval. So the 150,000, if they came in with a full request for funding that was over 100,000, that would have to go to council. 50,000 to 100,000, city manager reviews with consistency, and I would communicate with council. Under 50,000, staff directed. So if we change tourism development fund expenditure, a broad description that would need more clarification by council to a specific downtown vibrancy implementation line, then we would just follow council's already adopted fiscal control policies on the expenditure of those specific funds to implement the plan.
So one of the differences here, and correct me if I'm misstating it, I'm just saying it so you can tell me I'm right or wrong. The Tourism Marketing Contingency Fund is really about just that. It's about marketing. It's about promoting events or activities that take place here within the city. What we're talking about with what's listed there as TDF expenditures, or we're called downtown vibrancy, is maybe some kind of hybrid between product, infrastructure product, and possibly event-related activity going along with that product, and not the marketing of those things.
That's correct.
So this is really the first stage in allowing us to implement the study, which I think I know we all supported. We agreed to pay the money to do it. We agree with the concept, but we have to give the EDA some resources to enable them to do some of these smaller things. And then when the big ticket items come up, that will have to be a broader conversation that involves council. And any money that gets unspent would roll over to the next year to remain in that fund?
The policy reverts back to the Tourism Development Fund reserve for reappropriation the next year.
Does that help?
Yeah, no, I just was wondering if the EDA had an application, they said, let's do some pop-ups. I was just wondering if, because the EDA currently doesn't stream and it's a difficult time for folks to get to the meeting where the discussion takes place. So if that particular project were brought in front of council, they'll be brought into full public viewing wise, and also an opportunity for folks to comment. That's all. I just imagined that, let's say if we want to do pop-ups, I thought they would have to come through council because there may be some zoning matter that needs to be approved or whatnot. So that's just kind of what I was wondering, kind of the policy behind how that implementation will roll out.
If there's a zoning question, if it's not permitted by zoning, then yes, it would have to come to council.
Right,
But that
okay,
would be a question of land use and not a question of funding.
True. Got it. Okay. Good.
All right, consensus to fund this line item?
Yes. It's for me.
All right.
And clarify to also be more specific in the line item description.
Agreed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mr. Rorden is up. Marketing costs, benefits, and comparisons. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Adam.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Barbara informs me I need to scroll back forward. The other way? Back.
Doug will guide you.
You can count on me.
There we are. Good morning. I've been asked just to share a few slides this morning as a follow-up to the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance funding request that you received back in January, specifically to answer a few questions about marketing costs. I know that this topic comes up a lot, and I believe that even at the last EDA roundtable discussion, there were members of the community that were wondering, what does $800,000 buy? And it does sound like a lot of money, and it is indeed a lot of money. But in the world of marketing, especially vis-a-vis some of the other destinations that we compete with, $800,000 goes pretty quickly. You heard Mr. Rose talk earlier about the Fest Events budget of $3 million. Again, Norfolk is a very large city, as is Virginia Beach, and they do have lots of resources. So in some ways, it's not fair, really, for the city of Williamsburg to be trying to compare ourselves directly, but wanted to just give you some context and found that this might be helpful for you. So a few examples of marketing expenses that you have seen me request of council, and I've got a few more slides that kind of give a little bit more detail, but for instance, to conduct the fall seasonal campaign takes about a quarter of that $800,000 right off the bat. So we were just talking a little bit about An Occasion for the Arts with Stuart Honenberger's presentation. And Stuart talked about occasion, not just this year's the 50th, but over the past years, certainly that I've been here, we consider An Occasion to be the signature marquee event, if you will, in the middle of fall arts. So we try to promote An Occasion, but the other 90 or so smaller arts events that happen from essentially the weekend before Labor Day all the way through Columbus Day. And so those are the costs that are primarily media costs, and they come in a lot of different forms. The Christmas in Williamsburg campaign, which has been very successful over the last few years, is about, again, $250,000 in marketing expense to put that campaign on. Sports marketing and sales, $152,000. $100,000 of that is directly sports grant oriented, but the other $52,000 is the brochures and the ads, the marketing, the social media to again be promoting to a different audience there. That audience is our coaches and our events holders, not consumers, but we want those coaches to see us and those rights holders. Hotel conference marketing and sales is just shy of $60,000. Group tour marketing, $40,000, and seasonal special event promotion that we've been doing, which again is separate from the funding that you've just been discussing this morning to Culture Fix or An Occasion for the Arts and other things. These are again just marketing the different seasons, fall, winter, the holiday season separate from the main campaign. And I wanted to make it clear that these costs do not include what the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance actually invests paying our out-of-market and in-market vendors that work with us on those campaigns. So as you know, we have an advertising firm that helps us prepare our materials. They actually conduct the media buys at these amounts. It also does not include staff time for developing any of the marketing materials, the programs, whether that's in consumer leisure, conference, group, sports, or international marketing. So these are what I would call quote-unquote hard costs, where once we've put the program together, say for the fall seasonal campaign, and we see that price tag of $215,000, we receive several invoices that equal $215,000 that are being expended out of the budget. So those are some typical marketing costs that comprise the overall $800,000 request that we have. The next slide that I wanted to share with you is just, again, what things cost in our marketing world. And we just went back and didn't have to go far in our own record books to see that a cable television buy for 8 weeks in 2 markets, and the 2 markets that I pulled as an example were Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. Those are 2 of our strongest markets that we advertise in. That cost $425,000 just for 8 weeks. So yes, indeed, that does mean that the other 40 some odd weeks of the year, we're not doing cable TV advertising. A print ad buy, we are doing what's called a consolidated buy with one publishing house to get economies of scale. And that app happens to be a company called Meredith Corporation. And we use 3 different magazines in their family, if you will. The first is Family Fun, the second is Parents Magazine, and the third is Family Circle, which is the biggest of those 3, sort of the granddaddy of magazines with a very high circulation and readership. But to be in those 3 magazines across the year costs $326,000. And again, that's just for one full page ad each time in that magazine. Digital media. So again, there's a lot that comprises interactive digital media. We're doing a lot of different banner display advertising, but we're also doing a lot of paid search. We also do quite a bit with digital streaming now. to buy 4 weeks, so a month media buy in 3 markets. And the markets that we recently did a buy like this were Philadelphia again, Washington, D.C., and Raleigh, North Carolina. The cost to do that was $98,000. Radio commercials, so to purchase a 30-second or 60-second radio spot for 4 weeks in those same 3 markets of Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Raleigh cost just about $35,000. And public relations for 1 quarter, that's again out-of-pocket, hard costs, $22,000. Social media campaign for 1 quarter or 12 weeks time, about $5,000. And there is a little bit of confusion in the public, especially with those last 2 line items. They hear about public relations and social media and they think they're free. They think that, I know how to get on Facebook and do a post, or I know, about tweeting on Twitter and so forth, and that's true. As a consumer, you're doing that without any cost, but as an advertiser, if you want to have your post actually be seen by the targeted group that you're going after, you actually are doing an advertising buy with Facebook or with Instagram or Snapchat and so forth. So there is really no such thing anymore in the advertising marketing model that you can do a lot of that for free. I mean, you can't do those free posts, but in order to amplify or boost that so that the people in Washington, D.C. or Baltimore or Philadelphia that we want, that again fit a certain profile, whether they're an arts lover or food lover or sports lover, we actually have to purchase those. So just wanted to give you a general sense, of what it costs. And unfortunately, those costs do rise every single year, which leads me to what's called media marketing inflation. So the cost to purchase advertising space in any of these formats, whether it's, again, a digital display ad that you see when you're Googling something, or search engine marketing, a TV ad, a radio spot, newspaper, magazine, social media, they all go up. They are really established at the beginning of each year based on supply and demand. So you work with the parent companies and actually go, usually in the late fall, to hear what the rates are going to be for the next year. And unfortunately, too, 2018 is a slightly more challenging year than 2017 in terms of media inflation because those corporate entities, take any one of them. Take, again, a major publishing house like Meredith or a TV, a suite of TV stations. They're going to say to you, well, it's going to cost you a little bit more this year to invest because there's a lot of other advertisers who want that space because it's an Olympics year. So every 4 years we hear about that and deal with that. But then also it happens to be a political campaign year. So 2016, we saw a lot of this. We saw a lot of noise. We saw a lot of political advertising. And what unfortunately happens to all the rest of us who are doing non-political advertising is that it jacks up those rates because the inventory is lessened. And so we only have what's available, and they unfortunately can charge whatever they would like to charge and whatever the market will bear. And so those rates do go up. So what we were informed of by our agency, Lucky & Company, back in October when we were putting together the 2018 plan is that we could expect and we needed to estimate and project that year over year our inflation costs were going to go up anywhere from 5 to 10% depending on the media type. And what that means is, for instance, digital is very, very hot right now. You all have seen that and read those articles where lots of advertisers are moving, say, away from traditional 30-second television. It does have very, very high reach, meaning it reaches a ton of people, but sometimes it's harder to measure that. And so more and more marketers, like us as well, we have been gravitating more to digital media. And so, again, they know that more people want their advertising space, so they may charge a 9% year over year increase to get the exact same media buy that we were buying in 2017. So that doesn't always seem fair. We work very closely with our media company. They do an excellent job really negotiating these for us, and that's one of the reasons we hire them, is because when they come to the table with these companies, they're not just coming on behalf of Greater Williamsburg, they're also coming behalf on their entire client base. So they can have a little bit more clout negotiating and saying, we're not going to pay 9%, we only want to pay a 5% increase. And so we are successful in getting that down. But I just wanted to share that with you because people, don't always understand that an $800,000 budget this year actually is going to have a little bite taken out of it right away because we're going to just simply have to pay a little bit more. It's like us going to the gas pump right now and having to pay a little bit more for a tank of gas than we had to even a month ago. We don't like it, but it's what's happening as that price is floating up. So that's an example of the media inflation. And the last thing that I was asked by the team to share with you is comparative destination marketing. And I know that Andrew shared quite a bit of this last year, and it had done some excellent presentations on some comparative destinations that we want to be like, that we always are looking to for inspiration and new ideas and tricks of the trade and things that they're doing that we might want to take a page from their book and do. And again, this is the information that we are able to get working actually with our resources, our advertising agencies who use tracking services, but also the Virginia Tourism Corporation keeps some of this information on hand. We actually share this with them because we had some data that they did not have and vice versa. But you can see that Myrtle Beach, for instance, never used to have the kind of budget that they have now. So last year, their budget was just shy of $16 million. I was talking to a marketing colleague just a few weeks ago that they were commenting about how now if you actually take a drive on 95 South going to Myrtle Beach via car, you will see all of the billboards up and down 95. So they are southbound from here going to Myrtle Beach, but also they are northbound from Florida all the way up to South Carolina. It used to be the running joke in the marketing world that you would all see the south of the border billboards everywhere, the famous Pedro marketing billboards that became really, really annoying as you were driving on 95. They still have some of those, but most of them have now been purchased by Myrtle Beach. And it's incredibly impactful, but it's also incredibly expensive. Each one of those billboards may be costing them as much as $4,000 per month per board. So that's some of the ways that they're spending their $16 million, but they're also doing a lot of digital, a lot of social media, and a lot of other things to attract people to the beach. And they are not a four-season destination the way we are trying to be. They really are still a little bit more summer seasonally focused. Of course, they also are developing out their shoulder seasons. So Pigeon Forge, we hear a lot about, Dolly World and that organization as well. And the CVB and Pigeon Forge spends, again, just about a little bit less than Myrtle Beach. Washington, D.C., our neighbor to the north, is an interesting market because it's our number one feeder market for Williamsburg. So we are frenemies. We want to continue to talk to Washington, D.C. and to the residents of Washington, D.C. because when they're looking for an escape from the city, Williamsburg is one of their favorite places to come. So we do market to them a lot, but they also spend almost $25 million getting people up and down the eastern seaboard, including our residents, to go to Washington, D.C. The same with Virginia Beach at $26.9 million, Asheville, North Carolina at $17, Savannah, Georgia, and just even closer, 45 miles away in Richmond, they're spending about $6.4 million a year with the RVA campaign. So again, these are kind of the numbers that we're up against in terms of marketing expenditures. They've been, and some of these marketers have been consistently spending this kind of money, not just in 2017, but for several years leading up to this. So that's what we are competing with each year, each day. So with that, I will cease and answer any questions that you might have for me.
Ramsey?
No questions. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think a lot of people, like you said at the outset, question how $800,000 can go so quickly, particularly with the social media. And I assume that social media is for all types, like you said, Facebook and Twitter. Mm-hmm. And also, I guess it's probably very hard to measure the most effective means of marketing. And that is one question, is how do you measure the effectiveness of the marketing campaigns?
Well, we have marketing metrics, just as we have overall business metrics. And some of the key metrics that we look for in marketing is just, was the totality of a campaign able to drive more people to the Visit Williamsburg site? We are now as you heard from Andrea Sardone in her presentation a few weeks ago from Colonial Williamsburg, we are the #1 driver of referrals to Colonial Williamsburg. So people first think about, where do I want to go on vacation? If they've seen our marketing, whether that's the TV spot and the digital and the social media, maybe then opened up a magazine like Family Fun and saw it there. And so it is hard to kind of pull apart which was the one thing that tipped them over the edge. Most of the time, the digital media gets most of the credit because that's the last thing in the purchase funnel that people will see, part of a Google search, and then they may leave right from there and go to Visit Williamsburg. So a lot of times our digital does get the credit, but it usually is a combination of all those things. So then we want to see, okay, we did a campaign for 4 weeks, and what was the website traffic like before those 4 weeks when we were doing all of that effort? What was it like during, and then what was it like after? And we have a lot of studies that show that, unfortunately, really within 2 weeks of a marketing campaign, the website traffic goes right back down to its set point. So you'll see that spike, and then you will see it start to come down, which again is a case for why so many of us in the marketing world want to try to have a consistent, steady presence all year long. Because if you build to do something for Christmas, the minute you shut the system off, it just kind of floats right back down. So we're totally looking at the website traffic all the time. We are then looking at referrals, like, okay, where did they go from the website? How many pages did they see? Oh, I see they went to the events page. I see they went to the lodging page, and they're looking now to see where they want to stay and what hotel they want to book. I see they went to the restaurant page to start to scope that out. And then the next thing that we can see is their pathway to where did they go? Did they jump off the site and go to Colonial Williamsburg? Did they jump off the site and go and look at the Busch Gardens page? Did they go look at the Jamestown Settlement page? So our partners are relying on us to get those referrals in addition to their own marketing to be able to drive more sales. So we're constantly looking at that. We look at overall time spent on the site. We look at their overall engagement. Another key to see how interested they are is, will they click on the button that says get a visitor guide? If they are going to click on that button and say, send me a visitor guide, the chances are very, very high that they're actually going to visit here sometime in the next 3 to 6 months from when they receive that guide. So we do measure all of those things in our marketing metrics so that we can be seeing, oh, maybe that didn't work as well as something else, so that we can be what's called optimizing the marketing program. You know what, maybe that newspaper advertising didn't work as well this year, so let's not spend as much money in that, let's put more in social media. So it's a constant fluctuating of looking at what seems to be moving the needle and pushing more people to the website. But as a DMO, we don't sell anything other than the destination, so we really do need to push people from looking at Visit Williamsburg to out into the marketplace to buy products, whether those products are, hotel packages or, attraction tickets or, wanting to make a reservation at a restaurant. So those are some of the metrics we use.
So when I go on the website and look for an event or an update to an event, even if it's the same event, each of those things counts as
it's a new visit, right? So we actually track unique visitors. So if you went one day, but then Scott Foster went a different day, those are 2 different visits. But we can also see how many times you personally have come back. So it's not a new visit in terms of being unique, but it's, wow, this person's really engaged and really seems to want to come to visit because they did initial looking on Tuesday night, and then they were back again on Thursday, deeper into the site, looking at specific things they wanted to do. So
amazing the amount of information about
there's a lot of technology, yes, I will say that, again, it's not personalized, meaning that it's aggregated and you are just a data point. We don't know that it's personally you, so we're not watching your habits to know which restaurants you looked at or which hotel package. We just know that someone was doing this on Tuesday and then again on Thursday. So we don't want to be too big brother. We don't want to get into some of the controversies going on with Facebook right now. We're about just cookieing and understanding where people are going.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't really have any questions, but thank you for the information. I think, there's no question in all the years of sitting around the old CVB, the current Chamber Alliance, we've always talked about, the increased costs of advertising and needing more dollars, and it's true. Ms. Dammer gave a report the other day just talking about current revenues keeping up with CPI. We haven't been able to do it. But as I listen to that, I'm reminded of the value of the product that we've been talking about, investing in product. Because I'm not sure that if we, triple our money and ask a consumer to come to Williamsburg once versus 3 times, it's going to make the difference. We've got to have new stuff that encourages them or excites them about coming back. So,
Thank you, Ms. Reardon, as always, for your time and presenting to council. You may have mentioned this already, and forgive me if I not recall, but in terms of the comparative destination marketing, how much do we spend for marketing?
Right now, the combined amount of money that goes to the Tourism Alliance from the city, James City County, and York County is $1.9 million. And then through the $2 tax collection in those 3 jurisdictions, there's another 3.1. So we are spending $5 million in total between WADMAC and the Tourism Alliance to fill out the full year calendar of tourism support. So $5 million.
And with, I don't know if you may know this, but with SB 942, that legislation, how much would that funding be increased to the new, I call it WADMAC 2.0, but CVB, I guess?
The CVB overall would have, again, if the projections are correct, and we don't really know since this would be new territory,
Right.
I think the projected estimate is anywhere between $9 and $12 million annually that could be spent to drive much more visitation to the entire area.
So we'll be roughly around where Savannah, Asheville, North Carolina will be. Okay,
Correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
nothing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. And I just want to say, in closing, that I wanted to thank City Council and City Manager Marvin Collins and everyone for supporting the Taste Festival, and especially for being our gracious hosts last Thursday night for the kickoff event. I think the Striker looked absolutely beautiful. There's so many people who came into that event Thursday night who had yet to have come into this beautiful building, and they loved the art, which is going to stay up, and they love the music, and they love the food. So thank you for being our host Thursday night. It was wonderful.
All right. Been at this for 2 hours. I think we should take a brief recess if everyone's agreeable to that.
Yes.
We'll reconvene in 10 minutes. We will reconvene. D, Tourism Development Fund. Ms. Dammer starring again.
Okay, at this point, we're ready to begin our overview of Senate Bill 942. Senate Bill 942 levies a 1% retail sales and use tax in the historic Triangle region. I would note that different from the original bill, the approved bill does not tax groceries. It excludes groceries, and by that it means things that are not prepared for immediate consumption, either on or off-site. 50% of the revenues will go to the historic Triangle Marketing Fund to be managed and administered by the Tourism Council of the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance, with oversight from the Secretary of Finance. The other 50% is distributed back to the locality, which collects the tax, and there is a requirement that cannot be used to reduce the amount of revenues that the locality is already appropriating for the use by the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance. Alliance.
If I may, doesn't the legislation state that the funds go to the Tourism Commission, which is a committee of the Chamber of Tourism Alliance? And there's a distinction there.
Yes, yes.
Tourism Council.
There's a tourism council that has oversight of the historic funds.
Right.
But there is a requirement that the localities maintain their contributions that they're currently making. It also allows for James City County and York to impose or continue to impose a $2 a night transient lodging occupancy tax, and that's under 58.13823C, and I point that out because I'm going to mention that again a bit later. 50% of that, again, is distributed to the Historic Triangle Marketing Fund, and the other 50% is distributed to the locality, which imposes the tax. And then there are conditions set for this to take effect. And the first of those is it's not effective until 30 days after increases to the meals tax and the transient lodging tax are repealed. It also requires that the ordinance regarding the $2 a night transient occupancy tax concur with the provisions of 58.13823C, which is basically that there is a $2 lodging tax with 50% of that going to the Historic Triangle Fund and the other 50% back to the locality. The provisions of the Act expire January 1, 2019, if the requirements set forth above, and that would be the repeal of the increases in the meals and the lodging, the addition of the admissions tax, and also the reinstatement of the lodging tax, are not met by the City of Williamsburg. Then the provisions of the Act will also expire on the first day of the month following any increases in the food and beverage tax or admissions or transient occupancy tax. And then in general, the provisions expire on January 1, 2026. Any questions so far with the... Good?
Any questions?
Then moving forward, this is what we are estimating the tourism fund will look like if council elects to enact the provisions of Senate Bill 942 as their option. So the $1,900,000 sales tax represents 0.5% of sales tax that would come back to the city. And the lodging $2 represents half of the $2 lodging tax that would be distributed back to the city. That is a total revenue of $2,512,000. We still would have the transfer from the general fund of $2.2 million that represents the maintenance of effort. On the expenditure side, administrative expenses stay the same. They now, however, represent 4.2% of revenue, still below the 10% allowed by council. Also, we still have the same funding, $2.25 million, in the maintenance of effort. However, the Tourism Development Fund now consists of the Tourism Marketing Contingency at $150,000 and the Tourism Development Fund expenditures of $150,000 for a total of $300,000. That's because the WADMAC will be funded through the Historic Triangle funds. This allows for $2.1 million to be set aside in reserves. And I will pause now to see if you have any questions regarding the funding sources or uses on this slide.
Just one comment, just as it relates to the cities specifically and not including the contributions of our county colleagues. In addition to that $1.947 million, it comes into the city's
coffers.
TDF world,
Right.
there's another 1.947 million from the city that goes additionally to marketing that's not reflected here because it
That is
doesn't flow
correct.
through.
It doesn't flow through us. That's set aside to the Historic Triangle Marketing Fund.
Thank you.
So,
Sorry, please.
so basically, we still have a tourism fund, and we have three components, like we did with the first slide you showed, and this is basically another option of funding the TDF.
It is another option of funding the TDF. Again, this is using the increases that are currently on the books set for July 1 cease to be the funding opportunities. Those would have to be repealed. And then the state enacts the 1% with half of the funding going to the Historic Triangle Fund to be managed by the Tourism Council, and the other half coming to the locality of which this council has or has the opportunity to select to specifically fund the tourism funds with those funds. It could come back to the general fund, would be an option.
Right.
But not what we're
proposing,
right.
And so when you look on the expenditures and it has a total TDF of 300,000, as far as the amount of money that we would have for the TDF, it would be that 300,000 plus the 2.1 million that's on the revenue side for reserves.
At this scenario, under the proposed expenses, leaves 2.1 of revenue available, and we're showing that as a reserve.
So the total amount then would be the 2.1 plus the 300,000, so about 2.400.
The 2.1 plus the 2.6
Seems like the real
in expenditures, so it's about 4.8 roughly.
Yeah, 2.1 compares to 2.9.
Right.
Is that about right? On the prior, so it's about an $800,000 difference, but there's that extra 1.9 million from just the city alone going to market the destination, and that, of course, is supplemented by each county.
I just didn't want, if people were looking at it, to see total TDF 300,000 and just get confused.
Just to clarify, the total TDF is the amount expended in fiscal year 19 in the budget. The total amount available to the TDF is the reserve fund plus the TDF expenditure.
Right.
Plus the administrative cost.
Right.
That's the total TDF amount that's within the policy adopted by council in August.
And just one last thing, and I think you did mention it, that half of the sales tax and $1 of the lodging $2 tax would not flow through us.
Does not flow back to the locality. That's correct.
The state sort of collects and then sends that
And then that's
directly.
additional funds that can be utilized for marketing on a regional level.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the difference between this TDF and the other TDF is just several $100,000.
Yes, and I just thought that question might come up, and so I put the previous in. And really the differences here are obviously the difference in the revenue stream. We're not funding from increases in local meals, rooms, and admissions. It becomes a sales tax, with the exception of the new bill does propose the $2 a night room tax. We get half of that. But you're not funding the WADMAC in this scenario. It will come from the state portion, the historic triangle portion. And so what's not reflected in this in terms of the total tourism bucket would be the funds that would be coming from the Historic Triangle Marketing Fund.
And would it be fair to say that in the SB 942 scenario, at least that 800,000 has to be maintained, whereas in the prior one, with the city see it, we can do whatever we want with any of the other line items, right?
I was just going to say, the previous version of the bill required a total tourism maintenance of effort for marketing, from promotion, so all of that would have been required. the current bill that was adopted by the legislature is less restrictive in that only 800,000 is required by state law.
But again, a distinction is now the 800 is a maintenance of effort to the Chamber of Tourism Alliance versus
Correct.
the other was just a maintenance of effort.
Correct.
Not defined.
Can I ask one more question, just to help me understand the numbers? When we look at Senate Bill 942 option, it's got the lodging $2. Half of that comes to the city at $565,000.
Correct.
But when I look at the WADMAC funding, which I thought was mostly, if not all, the $2
It's
tax?
the difference. In the ordinance adopted by council, it changed it from $2 to 2%, which was a few $100,000 more.
Oh, okay, so that's how we're not double the 565.
I had to catch myself earlier in Barbara's presentation when she said 2%. I wanted to say that's the $2, and I'm like, well, no, council, in the proposed budget, council had changed that to 2%. The state law is retaining the $2, which is a slightly lesser amount.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
And in terms of the counties, sorry, I know you had an opportunity to ask questions before, but you had mentioned that counties also had an opportunity to impose the $2 tax. Do they not currently have that?
I believe, and I'll defer to Marvin, I believe
They do have that authority, and the original legislation was taking away the $2 and doing completely a full 1%. And the $2 charge was reinstated. The adopted version, they took the grocery money out. So they have that ability to maintain what they're doing now. They would just have to change their ordinances to reflect the $1 to the Tourism Council and $1 to the locality.
Gotcha.
And there's still, the counties may, whereas the city shall.
Right.
Is that correct on the $2 tax?
Correct.
Moving forward, our next steps would be to adopt ordinances repealing the increases in taxes at the May council meeting prior to the budget, amend the proposed budget to reflect Senate Bill 942, and to make those dates of changes effective for 5/31, and that's so that Senate Bill 942 could be effective with the start of, I see a typo. We did not catch that. Not quite 2029. Let's try 2019. And that's because of the requirement of 30 days prior. Or the other option that you have before you is to leave the proposed budget as it is, and Senate Bill 942 does not take effect. And so we are looking for direction and how to move forward.
And just one comment. It's fiscal year 19, but it would also, the date would be 7/1/18.
That's correct.
Correct.
Two typos.
The only way that this works is if we act in May. There is no adoption of this change in June for the 30 days to happen.
You have the ability to do this until December 31st of 2018.
Okay.
That's the legal answer. Let me talk just briefly about what the impact is on the organization. If we do not go ahead and move forward with the change, then we have to move forward with implementing a new admissions tax. There's a significant amount of organizational staff work that would need to happen in advance of from now until July 1st to have the other tourism development funds that are part of code to take effect. This would allow for conversation to happen with our partners to clarify things in advance of the July 1st effective date. Council has the ability to take some other action between that time if things are not proceeding as planned. But this does allow the state and partners and city time to prepare for that to take effect, as opposed to a lot of work that we would need to do to have the other done in time.
The repeal was done in June instead of in May. There's not 30 days required to undo it. You're saying that the time that if it's not done in May, then you all would go ahead and proceed to start working on things to take effect the 1st of July?
Right now, we have an admissions tax that's set to take effect on July 1st. We need to notify people. We need to notify all of our other businesses. Just getting the coupons out for payment of taxes for an increase in meal tax and room tax, what's on the book now. That's a lot of work for our finance department in the next 2 months. If we can get some direction today, then we start preparing for whichever direction council's looking at. And we also have to amend our budget to reflect the new, which isn't a big change, but we need to go through all the budget documents. Chris is right that you can adopt and amend a budget at any point, and the state law provides for December 31st, that clause on what was adopted.
Even though we have an ordinance that says we're going to begin, the other TDF funding mechanisms are in place, we could also vote to suspend collection of that until a future point versus just having to eliminate.
It's a self-imposed deadline.
Right.
Right?
Yes, you can do that.
So it's not one or nothing.
No, sir. No, sir. You do have the option to do that. It does extend the time for the business community to prepare one way or another.
They work hard. We can figure it out. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Have anything else?
Go ahead.
Well, there's much to like about the TDF, everything that we went through and all those months of conversations. It puts the tax burden onto the visitors who come and spend, and so when we reinvest those dollars, it's on the shoulders of the visitors versus the 1%, which is on the shoulders of the locals with a little bit of visitors in there with their meals. So I'm getting to the point about whether we should go one way or the other in my mind. The other thing that I don't like about the 1% legislation, it causes for us to give up our taxing authority until 2026, which is 8 years. And I would imagine that the state legislature would, if there was a crisis situation where we had to raise our revenues, that they might hear us and make an amendment to this bill. But it takes away our ability to raise revenue, and we operate differently than the counties.
Taxes.
Just those taxes, which are our primary funding taxes, other than real estate. So, in my mind, writing this into the legislation would be equal to writing in the legislation that the counties can't raise real estate tax. And they didn't do that. So it puts a burden on us greater than it does on the counties, I think. And that to me is a little bit challenging, or maybe a lot challenging. The maintenance of effort, again, takes the decision process away from us and puts it into the state hands. And that challenges me as well. The flip side, the 1% does give the greater community, the ability to raise $25 million. And it does put, a lot of money into tourism promotion, which is fine, so long as it's working. And we've got to make sure that there's a structure there that is productive, and it's not a two-headed animal with a WADMAC in the chamber doing different things. It needs to be a centralized organization. So those are just some of the quick thoughts that I have. So I want to hear from others before I give an opinion as to one way or the other.
Just one comment. We did work hard to establish the TDF, and this SB 942 doesn't get rid of the TDF, it just changes the funding.
But it does some other things that I mentioned.
Right, but there would still be funded a little differently. To your point, it would put a lot more money out there available for a regional approach, which is one thing that we heard people wanted and the basis.
So throughout our own city's tourism development fund discussion, one thing that came up often were that folks supported, business folks, even some residents supported the idea that the city needs to take a different direction in terms of its tourism product. And that's a philosophy that I largely agreed with. I think from another standpoint, another thing that we've heard from the business community, from our regional partners and residents, was that they wanted to see a regional approach to this, and that the city can't just stand alone and do it on its own. We are the historic triangle, we are the greater Williamsburg area, and we all have to have buy-in stakes for this to happen. But that said, now that we have SB 942, I share largely some of the concerns and the benefits that Mr. Ponce has stated. I think, speaking to that real quickly for SB 942, I am concerned about the severe erosion to our local zoning authority. That presents an issue to me as a local government student, but also
Taxation or zoning? Taxation.
Taxation power, sorry. I'm stuck between zoning, taxation, city budget, and constitutional law for my exam tomorrow, so there's a lot going on. But
It's not boding well for you.
yeah, thankfully I studied a lot. But anyways, back to with SB 942, it does erode severely our taxation authority that it's typically granted to the city charter. I think also with the maintenance of fund effort, I am not as concerned, although it does place a restriction on our local ability to determine what that funding is used. From what I've heard from staff is that the city has typically placed and can place conditions on how those funds will be spent, even if it's going towards one organization. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct.
So I'm not as concerned with that, and I think we could definitely make that possible. And I think the idea is hopefully the city could become a leader, a regional leader, with this tourism development fund. I've not forgotten that it's this council that has started the tourism development fund conversation. We have pushed as a body to push for a regional solution. This is what we have, and I think the opportunity, even though it will take a lot of energy and effort, an ability to have conversations to have a regional tourism development fund so we can reach to some more substantial and ambitious projects regionally among the three localities, and also have our own city's TDF. But in terms of our own tourism development fund, again, I largely agree with what Mr. Ponce said. A lot of it's being taxed on the visitors. I think the only shortfall is something that I alluded to earlier, is that we'll be the only ones doing it. And I think we have a lot of, in terms of how I envision tourism product, there's not really one particular project that comes to mind, but it's something that involves and requires a lot of regional collaboration. And I'm unsure if we were to go to the other route and all the effort and political, political energy or capital that's been expended to move this legislation forward, how our neighboring localities would react to us denying that request. So there's a lot to play along, and I'm open to hearing a lot of what y'all are saying about it as well. There's definitely pros and cons to both, but I think largely in terms of the funding mechanism, even though we receive a little bit less, like you said earlier, 100,000 less with SB 942, we still have a tourism development fund. It's just a matter of how can we take it to the next step, and also.
And just to build on that, if I may, and I do believe that there is some efforts or some commitment on the county's part to not only work together in this 1%, but how the 1% is spent. And I think there's also some underlining commitment from folks that I've talked to about a regional approach to tourism product. Building product should not fall squarely on the shoulders of the city residents. This has to be a commitment made by the three municipalities, not only to fund tourism promotion, but to fund product development. And part of what I'm hoping to hear from them more in a more formal fashion as we move forward here in the days ahead is that commitment. Because I know that, they're and Mr. Zhang is correct, this means a great deal to them. I know that there's challenges within their budget in this 1%, or how they use their halves means a lot to them. I mean, they've got some issues to deal with, as all municipalities do. But having some some commitment there, communicated back to council would help me understand better their position and where we should move forward.
Before Paul says something, may I just say one thing? Sorry, Paul. I'm giving your voice a little rest there. But, we talked during the discussions this summer about how much of the meals tax is residential versus tourist. And I think a majority or a number of the restaurants said, particularly in this area, that 30% of their meals is, or their business is typically residential. And so I think that they feel that having the 1% sort of evens it out a little bit. And I would dare say that many more tourists shop in Merchant Square area, particularly some of the Boxwood and Berry and stores like that, and even the clothing stores, than purely residents. So I think it does even it out more than what some have said.
I just wanted to make a point of clarification, if I can. Nothing in this legislation removes the city's legal authority to impose room tax, meals tax, or admissions tax. What you are effectively agreeing to do is not raise those taxes for the next 8 years if you would like to retain the sales tax during that 8-year period of time. I just wanted to make that clarification.
But at any point in that 8-year period, a future council is perfectly within their rights to raise those taxes.
And if that happens, then the consequence is the 1% sales tax goes away for everyone.
But they can.
That's correct.
Right. Thanks for clarifying.
I knew that, but just in my mind, I know that, once we go down this road and 3 municipalities have this money in their budget, to just then take it away is going to be even a greater burden than it is today to make the decision.
Right.
So one point that you made is that everything you said is fair.
Thank you.
The one thing that I just want to touch on was the comment about convincing our counterparts of the value in investing in tourism product.
Yes.
One important thing about Senate Bill 942 as opposed to our prior situation is that now at least they have the potential to fund that investment.
Sure.
They did not have that before. So I can't guarantee, nor can anybody here, what James City and York County are going to do, but
Right.
I think now they'll be in a position where they'll at least be open to the conversation.
Right.
And then we need to effectively make the case with them. And I, as you have, I've gotten a sense from both James City County and York County that they want to partner in these regards, and they want to make these things happen, and they want to invest in the community. Another point you made, though, is about the influx of money. It's a transformational moment in the potential for marketing this community.
That's true, too.
It's a significant increase in what we've been able to do prior to, and I think that perfectly warrants or justifies an evaluation of how we then proceed through the whole process of marketing and branding and
Right.
promoting Williamsburg, and that should go part and parcel with the increase in investment, because when you scale things up, you can't necessarily just do things exactly the same way you did them before with more money.
Right.
It requires a different level of thought, because they're all different. One of the things we've talked about over the years is how do we evaluate the effectiveness of marketing, and we just simply haven't had the resources to do that. We don't know yet if we will have the resources to do that, but at least we're closer to that point. So there's a whole other decision in that, about how that money is spent. So I agree with you there.
Right. And I think that was important that you also emphasized the marketing coming into play with that as well. It's good to see that the comparatives, it gets up to that level as well. So
2 topics for me: details and timing. So our hand is forced on this time schedule. We meet again as a body in a week and a half. The 10th. The details of how 942 will be implemented, in particular the form and function of WADMAC 2.0, are very important to me. Sat on that board, currently on that board. Doug sat on that board at some point, right?
Many, many, many years.
So I think that it has some structural limitations that cause some symptoms that affect its effectiveness. That needs to be addressed in whatever new form it takes. Also, if you just look at the legislation as drafted, currently we give $800,000 for the chamber to do marketing, as Karen pointed out today. Now, there's WADMAC 2.0, flush with additional marketing money, and we're still giving $800,000 for marketing if we just take things on their face. So what flexibility do we have to require the chamber to do certain things with that money? Those are details that I think really, I personally want to have hammered out before I sign off on this. I think the tie-in with the counties is extremely important. As drafted, they're not required to collect the $2 tax. I haven't had that conversation to say that this is definitely going to continue. Also, city, as you know, in either of these options, are still going alone on tourism product. I think we need to press the counties on that effort as well. So the idea that I'm going to be satisfied with the structure, form, and function of WADMAC 2.0 in between now and May 10th is pretty slim, unless there's something up that I don't know about. I would prefer to make this decision in our June meeting, if that's at all possible. And I'm willing to entertain other suspension of other taxes in order to make that light a lift on staff as possible. Right.
And I don't think it's just staff. It's every merchant out there who collects these taxes who will have to gear up one way or the other. And then it's, I don't know, is the Commissioner of Revenue involved? I mean, it's, you know, it's a lot of work that we're just putting out there potentially. I mean,
we could also have a special meeting.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I would rather go that way than putting something off till June, because this is nothing like the healthcare debate. One of the biggest challenges with healthcare today is people don't know how the rules are going to change, and when they continue to change, it's that uncertainty that creates problems in the marketplace.
That's right.
I think if we can get something figured out, even if we can schedule another meeting, it's possible to do that.
Well, you can schedule a meeting for that purpose whenever you feel like you need to schedule that meeting. There is no public hearing required to repeal taxes.
So I would rather we think about getting that done in May.
That's fine. And that's fine with me. So long as we have time to have enough conversation to get WADMAC 2.0 right. This is too important a juncture. And as presented right now, it's more or less, let's go 942. We'll work out the details on the back end. I don't like that. Don't like that at all.
I concur.
Well, there is a little bit of irony there. I'm sure people will be happy to point out to us when we established a TDF. Mention that, so we're aware.
But we know where we've been with WADMAC and
those details
metrics and all that kind of. We know where we've been.
As is concrete.
I would mention that it's a 30-day window between when City Council repeals and when this takes effect. Whenever you choose to repeal those taxes, should you choose to repeal those taxes. So there's going to be a time lag between those two events.
Right, so somewhere before May 20 or May 31st.
So from a staff workflow concern from management, can we prepare some form of delay on the effective date of the current ordinances? That we're really at the delay of the state on enacting something pushed us back to a critical point with the amount of staff resources that we have in finance and the Commissioner of Revenue. I understand Council's desire to need more time here. For us to be able to accommodate that as staff, we would request that we delay the effective date of those ordinances or a month or two to allow council the time to consider this fully. Still allow staff to go through the legal and structural steps to implement new taxes if council does not decide to repeal. Okay to come back at the May meeting with those ordinances to delay?
Or what were we saying, 30 days?
Whatever you need.
The other thing I need to point out is we all have to commit to be here that week. We often run into trouble scheduling things because of people's
travel. Right.
So we just have to be able to, if we're going to have a special meeting, we have to commit.
So let's talk special meeting for a minute. So second Thursday in June is your next regularly scheduled meeting after May 10th. What time period are we talking in between those two? Because that might help staff decide what time period they need to extend.
Sorry, you said
so
looking between now and May 10th?
Yeah, so if we're looking at our calendar, well, between May 10th and...
So the 31st. So May 10th is a Thursday, obviously. It's our Thursday meeting. We have the 17th, the 24th, and the 31st are the 3 Thursdays following that. Not that it has to be on a Thursday, but just to give you a sense of the...
Right.
So they're a full 3 weeks.
I can back up. So we need all of June, and either if we made a decision on May 10th, that you have from May 10th through June 31st to sort it all out, right? Whether we tax the 1% or we tax the TDF funding.
I'm sorry, I'm distracted with another.
One way, if we make a decision on May 10th, whether to repeal or not, by July 1st, city staff will have to do everything that they have to do anyways, one way or the other.
At the point council adopts an ordinance, we would provide that to the State Department of Revenue. That they need time on their end for the 1%.
Okay, so that's from May 10th to July 1st. I mean, everything's going to happen within that time frame.
Yeah, the initial staff thought here is on May 10th, you would adopt an ordinance repealing that's effective May 31st.
That's 50 days.
That
May 31st,
May 31st to June 30th is 30 days. The law requires 30 days after the effective date of repeal for the state law to take effect. So the state law would take effect July 1st, which is a fiscal year. It effect gives the state an additional, adopting on May 10th gives the state an additional 2 weeks to prep on their end as well. So this, whether either way you go, there's an impact on one administrative group or another on trying to roll this out within the timelines of the adopted codes and laws. So I understand the need and desire to work out any issues with partners on getting to where you want to be. We're just trying to point out the practical impact on the administrative side of then acting and what that impact is then going to have on our community.
I've always said to myself and learned a long time ago that any decision made in haste is a bad decision. So if we hastily run into this, it's going to be a bad decision.
And to Paul's point, when we decided to enact the original TDF, the details were going to be later worked out by this body. This is an entirely different situation. The details in this are reliant on a whole host of other local factors. We don't control those outcomes. So this absolutely has to be negotiated up front because we do not control that final decision.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I'm quite, flexible doing whatever we need to do to get this done in May. I think special meetings, whatever it takes. So we're here today. Made this work.
Right.
So I think seems to me that in order to save city staff the immediate challenge of what's on the books for July 1st, which is the increased room meals and admission, perhaps we do a delay on those three taxes, just to free up that burden. We'll work collectively with James City County, York County, to kind of iron out some of these other challenges that we may or may not have, to get the details worked out.
Right.
In my mind, it's just either way we go. July 1st seems to be a possibility. As nice as it would be, I just don't know how we're going to make that deadline. So let's repeal the current TDF funding sources for a month. Postpone them. Thank you. And then let's get to work on this other stuff. Notify the state when it's ready.
I mean, we have until say December 31st to adopt it anyway. So this July 1st deadline is really about meeting the fiscal, less about what our freedom to adopt is.
Right. Staff's moving on the assumption that the previous council policy was an effective date of July 1st. If council's willing to change the policy to another date, that's council's prerogative. Staff's fine with that. Our job's just to let you know what impact that is. And we can take direction. If July 1st is not the realistic date to have an effective date, and you're willing to provide the time to provide one, we will make that happen for you.
And it will affect the funding. It will affect the money collected.
Correct. We'll have to adjust all the numbers based on the time period collected. That will have to be done.
So what is it you want to accomplish?
In regards to the structure of WADMAC 2.0.
Yeah, what is it that would help make you comfortable?
Bylaws and declaration and all that of that organization are going to be really set out the roadmap for how it's going to function. I think one of the limitations of WADMAC as it is it's full of people like me. I have absolutely no marketing experience. I mean, I'm an attorney. My marketing experience is from a simple consumer. The idea that I can weigh in substantively on how this destination promotes itself is a flawed principle. Now, do I need to ultimately approve the plan? Absolutely. But for a non-professional like myself to be effective, it has to be led as a true, strong DMO, not a part of a multi-headed monster that we have today. So I think bylaws can be drafted in a way that make that exceptionally clear. And as far as the regional TDF goes, that's a discussion that it has to at least begin. All those other localities, a lot of members of this community said, this is not a regional approach, this is not a regional approach, city doesn't have the land, city doesn't have the land. Now's the time for that discussion.
So you're suggesting that you might not be prepared to move forward?
If we get WADMAC 2.0 right, I'm ready to move forward with SB 92. And we need to have positive momentum on a regional TDF. The county's budget cycles are similar to ours. Those discussions can be ongoing maybe for an implementation in 2020, but we have to have that momentum going.
Putting them on notice, they already have supervisors, at least with James City, already talking about discussing ways to use the additional revenue. So hopefully introducing that topic will be prudent.
Right.
And germane. Right.
Decided.
So I think what we're going to need are some concrete.
You asked me to draft the bylaw.
Well, if this is going to be contingent upon your willingness to repeal the tax, then you've got to put out there what it is you want to see happen.
Agreed. But that also needs to be a part of a community discussion. And I think the localities need to drive that discussion. And until we've had time to get together and really hash things out, doing this is premature.
Well, I'm not arguing that. I'm saying, but we have to start with something concrete.
Don't disagree at all.
Right, and that's why I propose that the three municipalities get together with some two-on-twos to just hash out the kind of the 100-mile
30,000 foot?
30,000 foot, 100 miles, whatever it is. Look down at what this organization should do, and then task maybe, ourselves and our local, our attorneys and bringing, some of the tourism professionals to hash out the organization that will be in charge of this, The legislation calls that it's got to hire somebody, and it's going to be of the Greater Chamber Tourism Alliance. And so who reports to who, and do we need all those layers? We've got to sort this out today. And
and this is all done in the effort to make this successful. This is all I want is this for this to work. It cannot be a continuation of what we're already doing. That leads to the same result. We're going to be speaking with a louder microphone to the same people.
Right. And this is not personalities. This is about function. This is about deliverables. This is about moving the needle so that the registers are ringing in our local businesses. That's what it's about.
And the keystone of that is we need a strong professional DMO. That's what other localities have, and today ours is fractured.
One thing I would say is I think we also need confirmation that the counties will retain their $2 tax.
Yeah,
agreed.
I don't know if I could form a motion to postpone.
You don't
This
need
is
to act
just
today.
a session.
Just guidance.
Well, in terms of the other taxation.
Staff has heard that we'll bring back to council at your May meeting a delay of 1 month to allow for a discussion with our regional partners on the bylaws of the new tourism council from a local government perspective as members, that a discussion on a regional TDF or funding that's provided to the chamber perhaps by all three partners and how that's used to benefit our region, seeking development and continuation of strong DMO principles, seek a meeting to discuss said items, and report back to council upon completion. The mayor, under your policy, would be able to appoint the two people to work on that, if that's okay with council. We will hold off on the budget to a special meeting at a date to be announced later in May that would, if things have progressed enough, include these items. That head nod?
I think so.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank
Business auditor funding. Are you doing this one as well?
Actually, we have worked together on this, but I am going to yield the floor to Laura Overy.
Welcome, Ms. Overy.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Morning, Mayor Freiling and members of City Council. Thank you so much for allowing me. Well, I didn't know that was going to go forward. Sorry.
Other way.
Okay.
Don't listen to a word he says.
Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to explain why we have a need for a business auditor in the city, and also to answer any questions that you may have about this position. I'm also going to explain the need we have, but also the work that they're going to do, and the benefits that I believe it will bring to the city. As you know, the Commissioner's Office is requesting a full-time business auditor. As the new Commissioner of the Revenue, I have been evaluating all of the procedures used in assessing business taxes for the cities. It is my responsibility to ensure businesses are taxed fairly, and I believe our current system for assessing taxes may inhibit fair collection. There are a number of things the Commissioner's Office can do to ensure proper and fair assessments, which include providing education and training to businesses on how to report gross receipts, auditing businesses to ensure correct information has been provided, and then going into the field to visit with businesses. We've talked a little bit about a full-time versus part-time position, and because our office currently has only 2 deputies handling all business license, tangible personal property taxes for Virginia, state income tax returns, and we work with DMV to provide personal property updates and many other duties as well. Because of this small staff, it really prohibits anyone from being able to go into the field and visit with businesses, but it also it doesn't allow for one of our deputies to go into a private area to do auditing of personal and confidential information. We're also looking for someone that has a specialized skill set. We don't have anybody on staff that has experience in business auditing, and because there are a number of research resources that are utilized in conducting an audit, we really need an employee that can work independently and think critically in order to evaluate compliance with municipal licensed tax ordinances, that can research, interpret, and apply state and local tax codes, and understand and decipher business and personal tax returns. The resources that are available, and I will say these resources are primarily only available to Commissioner of the Revenue per state code, are access to ERMS, which is the State Department of Taxation. We can utilize that resource to look at tax returns to make sure that what's being reported in gross receipts matches what's being reported on tax returns. We also have partnerships with the IRS, the DMV, Department of ABC, distributors, professional and occupation regulation, which regulates contractors. There's an auditors association, and then there are many other federal, state, and local agencies that we work with. So it really is important that we have somebody that knows how to work with these departments and can utilize all of the resources available to the Commissioner's office. I also want to mention there had been conversation about whether or not we can hire a contract employee. And what I will say is that we cannot contract another business like a CPA firm to conduct audits for the Commissioner's office. Virginia Code 58.1 through 3 strictly prohibits using an outside agency to conduct this work for us. So there are some things that this auditor is going to do in addition to what I've already shared with you, but primarily I would really like to see this auditor focus on educating businesses on proper reporting, including gross receipt breakdowns for various tax rates. There are a number of businesses that do multiple types of work that are taxed at different rates, and so really providing some education so that they understand what they're reporting and how they're reporting it so that that's done properly. Desk and field audits of all taxes administered by the Commissioner's office. We'd like to do field audits of business personal property where we're visiting a business and verifying that they have the computers and the equipment and the things that they need to operate their business, and that we have an accurate recording of what property they own. And then also, we have not, since the cigarette tax was enacted a number of years, we have not sent anyone into the field to ensure that all cigarettes that are being sold in the city are stamped properly, and that's just a function of ensuring that we're collecting fairly. We are also planning to bring the meals and lodging tax assessment functions back into the Commissioner's office so that we're able to be a comprehensive resource for businesses in our community. We really feel like businesses will benefit from being able to talk about all of their taxes with one entity rather than having to go to different departments to figure out that information. This has been discussed with the Finance Director, and assuming we have your approval, we're both willing to move forward in this direction. And I will just on a side note let you know that that Ms. Dameron and I have developed a really good working relationship, and all of these things we're in agreement on and are moving forward as a united front. So some benefits to, actually I'm going to go back, benefits for the business audit. In the state, when you have a new business, at the end of you have to estimate your gross sales, and then at the end of the year, adjustments are made, either credits or additional taxes are based off of what your actual gross sales were. And so we feel like an auditor would really assist businesses in trying to figure out and assess that information. And right now they're kind of making a guess. And so being able to provide a little bit more upfront support in figuring out what that amount might be will really help with our businesses. We have never reclassified the business tax rate, so the nature of business is always changing, and there may be businesses that were established. For example, a restaurant may have opened, and at the time they were only selling beer and wine, and now they're a full licensed bar under ABC. That tax rate may not have been adjusted in the past. There are some other small things like that, tweaks that can be made just to make sure that our businesses are classified properly. I mentioned that we were going to have the meals and lodging tax assessment come under our office, which really does just provide that streamlined experience for our businesses. And then I also spoke of the research resources that are available to the Commissioner's office. And these are really just a way for us to ensure taxes are reported fairly and accurately, but also to provide efficiencies for the city and for the businesses. Sales tax is another area that we can really focus on. There are sometimes lost sales tax because a business, perhaps in James City County, they use the Williamsburg address, so they assume their business is in Williamsburg, and they'll send us tax payments, and we're having to issue refunds. And on the reverse, there are businesses that might be reporting in another locality. So if we have a business auditor that's really staying on top of where these sales taxes are being paid. And another example might be events. We might have vendors that come into town for the weekend and not know that they're supposed to report sales tax for the sales that they make in Williamsburg during the time that they're doing business here. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention we have a number of contractors in the city. Almost half of our business licenses are given to contractors every year. And a contractor that does more than $25,000 worth of business in the city is required to get a business license and pay B-Bowl taxes. We have a number of multi-million-dollar projects that are going on in CW, at College of William & Mary, and now with Midtown Row. And we really need an auditor that's going to be on top of those contractors to make sure they're licensed properly and again, paying those taxes as they're required to do. I think the benefits to our city residents, we've built enhanced relationships with our business owners. We have that streamlined point of contact, and then we're providing correct tax reporting, reducing that reimbursement to other jurisdictions, and then just ensuring that we have fairness to our city, to our citizens, and we're promoting fair competition among businesses in the city. This really will level the playing field, I believe. So that I tried to be brief, knowing I was at the end of your meeting. So any questions or comments or concerns you have for me?
Ramsey?
No, I think it makes sense, and it was funny as you were talking, I was writing down leveling out, and then you said level the playing field, and so I think that's how it looks to me, and also that it stays, we're up on things as they're occurring, not trying to catch up or to repay, and we have a better viewpoint of what's going on a month-to-month, year-to-year basis. So. And
I will mention industry standard. They conduct, most auditors for other commissioners' office conduct an audit every 3 years. So they are going, you can't just do it once and expect that they're going to continue to know how to report. There's always turnover in staff and, CPA firms and other things. So being able to work with businesses on an ongoing, regular basis, I think is really important.
Well, and not only changing staff, but as you mentioned, the increased changes and growth in the city and new businesses coming in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Do you know if the city has had, or when the last time we had an auditor that did any of these functions?
So to the best of my knowledge, the Commissioner's Office has never had an audit. I do know that there have been, in the Finance Department, instances where they've tried to do some auditing, but really the audit function for this type of audit that we're talking about, field audits and desk audits, is supposed to be completed by the Commissioner's Office, and we have never had a staff member dedicated to that.
And this is pretty common practices and probably municipalities our size and larger to have this
Correct.
type of effort.
In fact, just all of the Peninsula Commissioner's offices have at least one, and many, obviously based on size, have multiple auditors. The only locality on the peninsula that doesn't have a full-time auditor is Poquoson, but they're half the size of the number of businesses, and they do have a dedicated staff member that is working on audits for them.
For me, I think it's, now that we have, a new auditor or a new commissioner of revenue, it kind of gives us the opportunity to go out and engage with businesses in ways that we haven't. I hasten to use the word Gestapo, but I hate when we talk audits, most businesses go, we don't want that, and there's probably not another term for that, but this is not about going out to businesses to hammer them home, but more about the education aspect of it, and we may find that some have overpaid.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that things are being done correctly, and I think your job is not creating the laws. Your job is to enforce the laws, and I think we as a body want to make sure that that we're taxing fairly and we're receiving and taxes as we're supposed to. So I think it's probably a good step forward.
Your comment just triggered me. Reminds me of separation of powers for my constitutional law exam tomorrow. Executive and legislative functions. But thank you, Laura, for your presentation. This was very comprehensive, and I guess my understanding of this is that we haven't had an audit before in the city, so we don't know what extent, if there's to some extent some underreporting that some businesses may be doing in the city. Is that a correct statement to go by?
Yes.
Or overreporting? I don't think that would ever happen, but
Right.
mostly underreporting.
I think I've done sort of a surface level evaluation of some businesses, just being able to compare sales, tax, and other functions. And I have found where there is some underreporting, and that may be a function of just not knowing or understanding how to report properly.
And that's the educational aspect.
That's why I think this is really an important piece. We don't want to have the approach that somebody's doing something wrong, but I think every commissioner's office that I've spoken with that has added an auditor has increased revenue because they have had that educational component, and also it is important to have just safeguards in place, to some accountability to make sure that businesses are continuing to report fairly. You don't want one business owner to be paying what they should pay and another not. And so this really does sort of level that playing field. Right.
Well, from my viewpoint, as long as you're doing the right thing, then I think it's safe to say we've got your back. And I think this position exemplifies that. Just one last question, real quick. I know we mentioned this in the last budget work session, but just want to reemphasize it again so the public who's watching grasps it again. But this position is expected to be net positive in terms of the revenue that may be expected to come in from some of that underreporting. Is that safe to say?
That is safe to say, and I would say that I haven't spoken to a commissioner's office that added an auditor and it didn't more than pay for itself.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here today, and very appreciative of what you do for our community.
Thank you for your support.
So how will we know if it's net positive or not?
We will track the audits that are conducted and adjustments that are made, so at the end of the year you will have sort of a bottom line of what that produced.
And there can be a report provided at some point in
Certainly.
the next budget cycle so that there can be some consideration about whether the position should continue.
Certainly. And I'm a numbers person as well, and I really want to make sure that what I'm doing is fiscally responsible for our city. So I wouldn't ask for support for something that I didn't believe would benefit the city and pay for itself. If I say it will, I believe that it will.
Oh, and I don't doubt that at all, but I'm sure there's some people who are wondering, oh my gosh, you're just hiring more and more people just to do more and more government work for no purpose, just to hire more people to be in government. And there really is potentially community benefit, but it's also being good stewards of our responsibility to collect taxes fairly and equally. But if it turns out somehow by some surprising set of circumstances that everybody's paying properly and there's no education involved, then we could give consideration to removing the position.
Correct.
And that was the one reason why I brought up the contract possibility instead of just going to a full-time hire, because it's a lot easier to not renew a contract than it is to lay somebody off.
Sure. Right.
We're being told that we just legally can't do that. I was deferred her for legal.
As long as the person is an employee of the city, how we structure that employment is fairly flexible. How we do that needs to be what's in the best interest of the city and the commissioner's office, but there's some flexibility with how it's structured, as long as we aren't hiring an independent contractor, which we are not able to do for this function.
Okay, thank you.
Let's do this. So I think in addition to the effects that you've talked about, actual audits, the educational aspect, the message to those people who aren't audited is that, hey, my work's being checked. So it has that kind of third dimensional behavioral change as well. I think this is more than a worthwhile investment. Main thing is we're only enforcing the rules that are on the books today, making sure we're doing an excellent job at that.
Correct. We're not trying to raise taxes or do anything that's adversely going to affect our businesses.
Did you hear a consensus, Mr. Manager? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Capital Improvement Program, Mr. Trivett.
Choose. All right. Mayor, members of council, I think I have the privilege of saying good afternoon. As we have officially transitioned. I also have the distinct honor of being the last presentation today, so I'm sure everybody is geared up for more slides with lots of numbers. So I just wanted to start with some basic stuff. What is the CIP? I think we're pretty liberal with the term CIP, and I just want to point out that it does consist of two elements. The first is the capital budget, and so that's the list of capital expenses for that budget year. And it also includes the capital plan, which is the 5-year project horizon. And that's really what we focus most on when we talk about the development of the CIP. So what is a capital expense? It's a capital item with a useful life of at least 5 years. For a project, that means it has to have a cost of over $20,000 or $20,000 or more, and an asset or a study of $10,000 or more. And that's a individually defined concept at every locality. There's some variance there, but generally consistent with the terms that we have here in Williamsburg. So the CIP process, how is it developed? It's probably handled more than any other aspect of the overall fiscal budget, because it begins with the departments completing worksheets on the projects they'd like to see included. It progresses there to the director of finance, and then the city manager put together the actual CIP that's considered by the planning commission. The planning commission does their review and provides comments based on the planning documents that guide the city. From that, the draft CIP is prepared and reviewed first at the budget retreat in January, and then the city manager's proposed budget includes the draft CIP based on all of that input for the council's final adoption in May. So this year, what does that produce? It produces for the 19 capital budget, the expenses expected in FY19, 18 projects from 5 project areas. They total a project budget of $5.5 million. There's contingency and GIO efforts included in that budget of $509,000, and then principal and interest on debt that we've incurred on CIP projects in the past of $1.6. So that gives us a total FY19 capital budget of $7.7 million. And then on top of that, we will receive or expect to receive $5.7 million in new revenue to the CIP, which includes revenues from things like the sales tax that we collect, as well as grants and other contributions from other funds to the CIP projects. And then in addition to that, we have $11.2 million, which represents carryover appropriations from former fiscal years toward projects that didn't get completed for one reason or another. They fell behind schedule, they were delayed, they weren't all funded completely, whatever the case may be, and so each year that money is rolled over and then applied to that project when it does proceed.
So just a couple of capital budget highlights from FY19. Capital Landing Road redesign, we've got $590,000 programmed for that. Monticello Avenue redesign, $5 million is programmed for that. The majority of that funding, though, is money that's coming from the carryover funds. Quarter Path Park, $150,000. Fire station renovation of $1.2. The virtual server replacement of $90,000. ERP replacement, we're still ongoing with replacing that software that really governs almost all the business the city conducts. And so there's $250,000 that remains in carryover funding for that project. Vehicle replacement plan, obviously every year we replace vehicles that are termed out, consistent with our policy. This particular year, the number is higher than most of the years if you look at the horizon, and that's because it does include a fire apparatus. Thank you, Chief. And then the last item is the agencies and interjurisdictional, and that's the one project I wanted to highlight is the Williamsburg library renovations. That's a project that we have had budgeted in the CIP for some years. This year we're budgeting $60,000, and the intent of that money is to help fund a conversation about what the library needs to be as it grows. And what we don't want to do is invest a lot of money in rehabbing this facility only to have it not meet the need that's envisioned for the long term. And of course everybody here knows that the library has started its own conversation in the community about what the library needs to be as it matures, and that could include further partnerships with James City County and York County, and so we want to be in a position to capitalize on that. The FY19 through 23 CIP, the plan as a whole, includes projects that were submitted by 9 departments and 2 partners. 42 projects were submitted and 35 were included. So the obvious question is, what were the projects that weren't included and why? And without going into the details about what they were, it's safe to say that they were eliminated because they didn't meet the test for inclusion in the CIP and were considered as part of the operating budget or otherwise postponed beyond the horizon. So the total project, or the total plan is $41 million. There's $1 million in contingency. If you look at each one of the years, there's contingency budgeted for projects, and then expected revenues of 33.9. So, and then to add to that, we have 7.5 in principal and interest over that 5-year term for the existing debt that the city has incurred. So just highlighting a couple of those projects that go out a little further in term. I have the Ironbound Road phases 1, 2, and 3 for 5.2 and completion in 22. Capital Landing Road redesign, the total expense there of 6.3. That construction begins, or the design begins in 19 and hopefully concludes in 22. We have the Capital Landing intersection, which is a component of that project, of 2.1 with completion expected in 22. Parks and Recreation has a couple of projects at the parks, Kiwanis for $185,000 and Waller Mill Park $135,000, and those are in multiple years during the plan. I think it is important to point out that we've had a lot of conversation about the master planning process that's going on in Parks and Recreation, and we don't want to spend money only to have that plan tell us we shouldn't have spent it or we should have spent it differently. The bulk of these monies are maintenance issues or improvements to existing assets. So I feel like these monies are well spent. Public safety, we've got the 2 big projects, fire station reconstruction, total cost there of $11 million, design and construction 19 to 21, police station renovation of 3.2, 20 to 21, and then in general government, the vehicle replacement plan, of course, a big expense, 2.6, and that spans each year of the plan. And then lastly, agencies and interjurisdictional, we budget for the school system capital contribution of 5.6 in FY19 to 23, and of course, every year that one changes because every year they produce a new CIP, which impacts what's included and what's not included. Important to point out that the 5.698 that's represented in the current plan will likely change before you adopt the final version because it's based on what James City County actually adopts, which is already different in its proposal form from what's included in the proposed budget that you have before you. It's a very minor difference. I think right now we're at about $50,000 in difference as deltas, but it is worth pointing out that those numbers will change from year to year. That is the CIP.
Wow. Just a couple things for people who might be watching. I think it was on slide number 2, So you've got Capitol Landing Road redesign of $600,000, and then you've got Monticello Avenue redesign of $5 million. And some might say, well, Monticello seems to be a little shorter there, so can you just...
Sure, and to do that, I'll skip back to this slide because it shows you the total budget for the Capitol Landing Road redesign. So it goes back to what I said, that the capital plan is really broken into two pieces, the 5-year horizon and the immediate budget year. So in the immediate budget year, the amount that's budgeted for that particular project, Capitol Landing Road, is $590,000, although the total budget over the 5-year horizon for that project is $6.3. And you could add to that easily the Capitol Landing intersection project of $2.1. So they're similarly funded in terms of total cost. It's just what's going to be spent in the first year. The Monticello Avenue redesign is expected to be completed in FY19, and so that money is fully budgeted there. But as I said, even if you look at the spreadsheet for the CIP, you'll see that the majority of that money is actually carryover funds from former fiscal years.
And design can also includes construction. It's just not drawing it out with engineers. And then under public safety for the fire station renovation, because everyone knows that money has been borrowed for new construction, so there may be some questions on that as well.
Sure.
As far as
right, so that's a similar situation in FY19. We expect to spend $1.2 million on that project, but the total budget over the horizon is $11 million. Now, we've not completed RFPs for that project, so we don't know exactly where the budget will come in, but that's what we're budgeting right now for the project.
Thank you.
Hans?
I don't have anything at the moment. I defer right at the moment and try to find something.
Thank you, Andrew, for your presentation. And I'm assuming this went through Planning Commission, correct?
Yes.
And did they have any particular comments that should be of attention to us?
You know, it was interesting. This year, their comments were very, very light because they are just starting the process of redoing the comprehensive plan. The economic development plan is also being redone. So the plans that they would consult to kind of render an opinion on projects that should be included in the CIP are old, and many of the projects have already been completed. And so they essentially, in their letter to the manager, said, here are the major concept areas that we support, and they were all included in this version.
Yeah, and I generally agree with those contours of whatever that content of that letter may be. It's some of the highlights that you've brought out speaks to some of the priorities this council has set forth, and I'm supportive of it. So thanks for your effort and time and presentation.
Thank you. I was going to try to find something on there, but I think in general, it is an aggressive CIP. There's a lot of money there. There's no question, and I think it's easy to look at any one thing and say why. But you threw out the fire apparatus. I mean, could we wait another year, another 2 years? But at what risk? And we've had that conversation. And and the other one I think for me is a big ticket item, but it's a must do, and that's the Capitol Landing Road repairs over there. I think given the investment that we've made in that corridor, in terms of real estate, setting it up for a future economic generator for us over there, we have to put that additional money in to be kind of to generate that stimulus. And I see former councilman, the Honorable Billy Scruggs, with us. He's probably sat with on 2 task force with regards to Capitol Landing Road over the last 85 years. Number of years, long time it's been. So I think we finally put our money where our mouth is. So thank you.
Where does tell me about the capital revenue, the 1% sales tax? That's the same amount that we would be collecting if Senate Bill 942 changes come into effect. Is that an equivalency? Or
double. It's double, and it includes groceries. So it'd be 4.4 a year instead of a 0.5% without groceries.
Right, because you're not splitting it up.
And then The 500,000 that we assume every year comes from a surplus from operations, is that a traditional number that we've plugged in every year in the past?
The word traditional and every year troubles me a little bit. We started doing that a few years ago to make sure we had a placeholder for revenue from the general fund into the CIP, so that we could be certain that at the end of the year that surplus was moved to the CIP to help its sustainability.
But we don't show that coming out of the general fund anywhere.
No, we do not do attrition budgeting, and it's not recommended by finance. What that does is it recognizes that on average, over a 10-year average, so a trend analysis for the capital plan, that the city on average has put in approximately $1.4 million a year. So it's an extremely fiscally conservative amount that's less than what the city has put in. That still gives you a more accurate view trending out with the planning process of where you are on that percentage. Failure to put that in for those out 4 years or all 5 years would be a $2.5 million less to the revenue side, and that's still significantly less than the trend average for what you put into reserves on an annual basis.
And what are we expecting that carryover or that contribution to be this year?
That's done in the budget the audit process.
I mean the current year. Right, fiscal year 18. Right now, what are we forecasting that amount, that contribution to be?
I am still reviewing some of the data from the more recent quarter. I do not think you'll have the 1.7 that you had previously. I'm not sure I'm quite ready to. I think you'll do better than. I think you will add some. I don't know that I'm ready to commit to an amount. Probably by the May 10th meeting, I would anticipate that I'd have a better feel for that. So if you would allow me to defer a couple of weeks.
One of the reasons I asked these questions is that in our budget retreat, conversation was that we had these converging trend lines, and we have expenses that are rising faster than our revenues are rising, but we're still counting on our revenues achieving a surplus, even with the additional school funding that we're doing, even with the additional fire and EMS people that we're bringing on board, even with the additional commissioner of the revenue position, even with the addition of the person in the, I know it comes out of the TDF, but the person who'll be working in the economic development area. And so we've got all these operational expenses that are growing, and our revenues aren't. And that's why we're talking about raising the real estate tax. But I'm also wondering if on this capital side, we're just too aggressively spending money. I mean, I brought this up in the retreat. Our ratio of reserves to our policy is 35%. We're at 83%, and we were going to be down to 36% in 2 years. And now we're forecasting only to go down to 42% by 22. And I understand that CIPs are cyclical. I understand that you save up money so that you can spend it at a period of time. But we're also borrowing a significant amount of money to accomplish some of these expenses, so it's not naturally happening out of surplus revenue. So I just wonder, I'm worried that we're going down a bad path on these bigger capital expenses that potentially jeopardize our future. And I'd rather, I don't have a specific point to make about what I would change, but the first thing I would look at is, are there any bigger ticket items that have to happen in the given year, or can they be pushed out over time so that as we have the redevelopment of the Midtown area and the Monticello corridor, as we have the downtown vibrancy plan put into place and we start to see new revenues as a result of this, as we invest more in tourism marketing and we start to see a return on that investment by increased revenues, which I believe is all that we're hoping for through the tourism product and tourism marketing, we're going to generate more revenue so that we're not trying to pay it all tomorrow, and we're not trying to pay it all in fiscal year 20 and 21 and 22, because I think we're just spending too much money. And that's my opinion.
Oh, you want to use your reserve time?
Well, I think A couple things that the Mayor just mentioned, I think, are true. We have been spending down our reserves, but I also believe that our reserves got to such a high level through unnatural circumstances, and that was, a boom in our tourism industry from about 1975 to 1988. That's when revenue, went through the roof, and since then we've trended off. But at the same time, we have not kept up with our infrastructure needs. We deferred a lot of these expenses, and I think now we're trying to catch up. And I think we've been real good stewards of the future by being aggressive, not only in our spending on capital, but in terms of redefining who Williamsburg is, so that we can continue to grow that revenue. And so I think we are at a confluence where it's tight, but I think it's almost more natural, given what we have as an economy, as our economic engine. It's service to education, tourist, and healthcare. That's what we do, and I think we're going to grow that. At least that would be my hope. I think we've set forth a good strategy to get there, and if the results pan out, we'll start to be able to grow that reserve even greater than our reserve policy of 35%. I think you're right. We are spending a lot of money. Got to make the investment, and I think we've done that. And we as a community over the last 100 years have been very fortunate that other people have made the investments for us, and we haven't had to do that.
My take is Doug's point, that significant fund balance was created in the best of times. This council has made strategic decisions to put it back into the market to hopefully create that next future. I'm also cognizant of the fact that this is the capital budget plan. Doesn't mean we get all these things done in that time frame. So this is flexible as we go forward, future budgets, and say, hey, it's not here this year, we're going to have to put off X, Y, and Z. And it's also my understanding that's been a traditional practice of money's not there for that, we're going to have to push that down the road. Then future councils will have a policy discussion on what gets pushed. I know Capital Landing Road hangs out there as a big number in the future, but that is, any area of the city has the greatest economic potential. Severely underutilized now. I think we have a good plan to bring traffic back down that corridor. I believe in that plan. That being said, we shouldn't overtax ourselves to get it done right now. It can get done when the revenue is
here. To the Capital Landing Road corridor enhancement money, it's state money.
Can you flip to that slide real quick, Drew? So of the 6.3 plus, approximately 40% of that is grant funding. The Capital Landing intersection is 100% VDOT funding. I would also point out that the Ironbound Road project above there is 100% VDOT funding as well. So several of the largest ticket items in our capital budget have significant state funding. And so we can smooth the CIP impact percentage by spreading out a project over time. Removing it is also removing those revenue sources so that it's not changing the percent on some of those. I'm sorry, one more point, Mr. Brown, I'm sorry. If we can go back 2 slides to the, all right, so one impact on the percentage is the Monticello Avenue redesign project. That's $5 million of local funds. It's not matched by grants. But that's part of council's #1 strategic priority, from my understanding, is getting that done. Another impact in driving it down are capital projects that we've recently paid for, such as this structure, the purchase of blighted or less underperforming property in preparation for redevelopment. So some of those expenses have already occurred to drive it down. But we're open to whatever direction council has on moving or removing.
So what's the time frame within which we would need to move forward on the Capital Landing Road redesign to take advantage of the 40% state match?
As proposed in the plan, the design would start in 19. Well, first we need to do some conceptual and community charrettes to make sure we have a design, and then go to design. My understanding from talking to Public Works, the next step is underground utilities is a big chunk of that, and then the actual road improvements are the last outer years of that project.
So, I'm sorry, what is the time by which we need to undertake that project in order to take advantage of the state match?
And they would be funding, if it's funded, revenue sharing in this year, and I'd have to check on what programmatic expenditure paybacks they have.
And I appreciate that the state money is covering 40% of that. That still means there's $4 million sitting out there that we're spending. And I get it's a plan, and I'm not directing these to you. You're just standing at the podium.
Messenger.
But once we spend that planning money in fiscal year 19, we're putting ourselves down the path on spending the entire 6.4 or whatever the number was for Capital Landing Road.
Right.
And only 2.4 of which would be covered, or 2.5, whatever, would be covered by the state. I mean,
Yep.
I just think we need to think hard about this,
Well,
because
and-
these are big numbers.
And, you know, following your logic, that $60,000 for the library study,
Where's that going to take us?
that's going to lead us to a big number, and I can guarantee you there's no state money coming
That's
into
right.
that deal.
And we don't have any money to do that.
No, it's not, you know. And,
So-
and what I love the mission of the library, I support it, but I worry that that discussion is going to get out ahead of the city's financial resources, and then we're going to be put in a compromising position when they come to us with a plan.
And you said you would fund it.
And we're already committed. So whatever message we need to send with that $60,000, or reconsider sending the $60,000, it needs to be clear. Don't get ahead of the people who actually have to write this check.
I mean, I don't want to be coming back here. You won't be coming back here next year. I don't want to.
I'll be right there.
Yeah. I don't want to be coming back here next year and telling the community we need to raise taxes again,
To get this done. That's
because we're falling behind even further.
Right.
And I know capital is separate from operating. I get all that. But it all plays in together, and we have an obligation to maintain that certain level of reserve. And if we're going to have some level of conservatism in the way we budget our money, I would like to see it on the reserve side.
Right.
We're not sacrificing things that need to be done. I know we need to redo the police station. We've all been in there. It's not acceptable the way it is.
Right.
We could argue one way or the other on the fire station. Of course, a better facility is better, but it's maybe not of the same level of urgency. We've got to look at every one of these projects with that same degree of scrutiny and say, are we really committing this community to fund these projects or not?
Right.
Stop.
Any other comments? Just from a functional perspective, I'm not sure how much more direction staff needs from us on this.
I'm not sure how much they've gotten.
Yeah, I know. We've talked a lot.
Am I hearing that we need to, so one role of the CIP is to capture the goals, initiatives, and outcomes within a funding horizon in that 2-year period to try and start planning those out. It is a planning document. Goals change and items can be bumped. Last year there was a project for Paper Mill Creek Park that was in the planning horizon. That's not in here for the reasons that the mayor gave. The funding reality of that project was that it just didn't work within. Staff is cognizant of the fiscally conservative approach to our reserves sought by the city. I would say that in previous CIPs, this community had a lot of to be determines written in there. And so they were not showing all the numbers for the projects that were in the plan. We're trying to be transparent and upfront in our fiscal planning with this. So and the percentages are provided in the out years. Those weren't provided in the past as well. So we're making efforts to be more transparent and open to council and the community about what the realistic costs are, so that as you go into a GIO process this fall, that council can have a meaningful conversation about what projects are important to retain and which may need to fall out. So if council would like us to push or remove something, we're happy to do so, understanding that at this point that is a out-year planning project predominantly, and we're following the previously adopted policies of council on projects and moving that forward.
Comments aside, I think Capital Landing Road's a great concept, great project. My question is about the timing. Since we've got and I also wonder about, this maybe isn't a question for this forum right here, but do we put too much expectation on staff to accomplish all these things at the same time and run the risk of every one of them not being done to the same degree of excellence that we're used to?
So I think we probably would have heard that from staff. Marvin's very, very willing to tell us that staff is stressed, and so I haven't heard that with regard to the CIP. I also believe that, this council or a future council will be able to say, you know what, we can't achieve this, and let's push it back a year. That's not what I think we're hearing this year in this budget. And I think we need to continue to move forward. Your point about, starting down that road, leads to another commitment. I agree. But that's just part of the planning process, as is the library. So I'm comfortable with the CIP as it's presented.
On the assumption and public knowledge that this is a hope to get done list, this is not, and based on funds available, I'm fine with this as drafted. But know that the fund side doesn't work out. Some of these things fall away. It's been the practice forever. That's not recreating the wheel. Everybody good? Look at that. Open forum.
Let's see. We give the speakers 1 minute now.
Welcome, Mr. Scruggs. Come on up.
Wait, you don't have any speakers cards, right?
No, I don't have any speakers. Yeah, thanks. Thank you for sitting through all this.
Until this morning, I had forgotten how much I enjoyed budget meetings. Mayor Frawley, Vice Mayor Foster, Council. This has been entertaining and informative this morning. I really had forgotten how much does go on at these meetings and how much has gone on in the background. And actually, I want to thank you all for your leadership, primarily in recognizing the importance of investing in marketing for the tourism industry in the city. Of all people, that without the success of this sector, the tax burdens on the citizens could very easily be overwhelming. Kind of as we're seeing right now, and I really appreciated the discussion that you've just had. My favorite book, and I'm sure you've all seen it, is the Colonial Williamsburg publication, Williamsburg Before and After. When I look at those pictures of what Williamsburg looked like in the 30s and pre-30s, we were just another little southern town fading into oblivion. One of the new staff mentioned to me she came from Danville. I look at places like Danville that when we had a sock mill over here. When the mills closed down in the South, these little southern towns just faded away. So thank God John D. Rockefeller came in and made the investment that he made, and we became a tourist town. I particularly like Mayor Frawley's discussion about where's the money. Revenues are going down, but we're spending more money. Great deal of the reason why revenues are going down is because we have less hotel rooms, we have less tourists coming in, and yes, we had good years, but we advertised those good years, we marketed those good years. So I really appreciate the fact that you guys are so interested in doing that marketing. I very much appreciated Karen Reardon's comparative chart. I'm a numbers guy too, and we don't spend what our competitors spend. And we haven't. We've sat back on our laurels for decades now. You know, we just expected they'd keep on coming, and many did, but we're not competitive, and we really are getting our clocks cleaned. We know it from Asheville. Asheville's a very easy one to look at and see. Other things that Karen said, and I will tell you a very positive thing that the Chamber has done as representative destination is Visit Williamsburg. My business, particularly lodging, lives and dies on digital marketing. The Visit Williamsburg is one of my top 4 referrers, and basically I just pay a membership. Chamber don't even have to do that because of the city's involvement. But other sites, I pay thousands of dollars a year to be listed on that site, and they might be 10 or 11 or 12 down in refers. So that's a wonderful investment the city's made. Get to my point real quick here before I run out of time. That was the other nice thing when I sat up there. Geez, I could talk about everything as long as I wanted. A concern I do have with regard to outside agency funding, and I gave Drew some sheets that he handed on to you all. Colonial Williamsburg, God bless them. Again, thanks John D. Rockefeller for being here. But one thing I've noticed over the last couple of years is CW sells single-day ticket, multi-day ticket, annual tickets, Friends of Williamsburg. If we live here, we get a free ticket. Sometimes on the daily schedule of event, things are marked free. But that's not always true. There are some activities that you can participate in only if you contribute, only if you have an annual ticket, or third, only if you're staying in Colonial Williamsburg property. I have a problem with that, and you'll see some examples that I circled there. I have a problem with that because Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, the ticket seller, is a nonprofit operation. Colonial Williamsburg hotels are a profit operation. I know they're together. We always get confused which is which, but they are separate. When the city contributes money to the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, I do not expect that money to support the Colonial Williamsburg hotels or restaurants, the profit-making arm. I think that it should be either available to all those types of things or to none. It confuses my guests. My guests say, well, you're a Colonial Williamsburg property. I'm flattered that they would say that because I think that's a compliment, but I'm not. So I would like to ask the council to request whether or not that's an appropriate thing for that funded agency to do. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Scruggs. Mr. Kirkland.
Mayor Freiling, members of council, I'm Ron Kirkland, Williamsburg Hotel Motel Association, 1001A, Suite 2E, Williamsburg, Virginia. 2 things. On the considering repealing the TDF, WHMA would recommend that you take as much time as necessary to get it right now. If that means you need to delay a month or 2, I think that would be prudent to do so. How the Tourism Council is put together now is of vital importance going forward, and developing a regional TDF approach is equally as important. And I think if you take the time now to get it right, it's going to help a lot of folks as we go down the road. With the considering the business auditor, reminds me when I first came to Williamsburg, I used to run hotels and timeshares in town, and occasionally I'd have to come before council and, you know, maybe rattle my saber a little bit, either here or through the press. And during a much more oppressive regime at the time, coincidentally, if I rattled my saber too hard, I would get a note from code compliance. Again, it's probably just coincidence. So we want to make sure that everybody's paying their taxes and they're not doing what they shouldn't be doing. People need to collect the revenue, pay the tax they're supposed to pay tax on. But there's a regulatory burden, and to use Councilman Pond's word, we don't want to create the tax Gestapo in town. And so if there's you can approach that cautiously, find the right person to make sure that you are collecting the revenue that you need without it becoming people live in terror of somebody from the revenue department coming to visit. That would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second?
Like you seconded?
No, I asked for a second.
Second.
I'll defer to Barb as making the motion now.
Mr. Trivet, you call the roll? Paul. He never gets a second at anything.
Aye.
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 We're adjourned.